Hello Chooms, welcome to another Cyberpunk 2077 lore compilation. I've received a lot of support for my previous videos from those who like to leave on long-running lore narrations, so expect to see many more of these as my content library grows. Today, I have selected a range of lore from the likes of religions and cults, the untold stories of Maine's Edgerunner crew, and even abandoned timelines. I'll put all of them on screen and timestamped below. Keep in mind, because of the nature of this video and the overlapping events of many of these stories, there will be repeated information, so thank you ahead of time for your understanding. So go ahead and lock into that assignment, settle into bed, or really, just do whatever you please, and enjoy this ad-free lore compilation. Some of you might not have a complete grasp on just what exactly the Crystal Palace is and how it functions. I'm going to fix that. While there is a common misconception that it's essentially a space casino, it is actually much more. When the comparison is made that it's Las Vegas but in space, it isn't simply prioritizing the gambling atmosphere of Vegas. It is quite literally a full-scale city in space, containing of course the casinos, but also restaurants, low-gravity pools, luxury apartments, concert venues, a hotel, a park, and even its very own conference halls for corporate clients. So how exactly does this orbital colony manage to not only fit, but organize all of these activities and construct itself into a realistic manner? Well, we can actually find this information along with a diagram in the Cyberpunk 2013 sourcebook, Near Orbit. In this diagram, you can see that you'd be entering at the top of the colony in a rotating, docking core. There are then 5 toroidal ring structures surrounding the 2-kilometer center core of the station. Each of these ring structures boast another 2.2 kilometers in length. Starting from the top, you have a living/park torus, a residential torus, factory torus, residential torus, then finally another living/park torus. Then the bottom contains the power/life support core that functions through a solar power array and fuel cells, which you can also find at the top. Inside each inner torus are 4 levels of living facilities, manufacturing plants, life support systems, and apartment blocks. The 2 outer toroids support huge open parks. They are not only for recreation, but also provide the bulk of the palace's oxygen supply. While most of this area is devoted to open space, there are common buildings, restaurants, and housing for high-ranking corporate and European Space Agency officials. While initially viewing the Crystal Palace, you might be forgiven for imagining a map layout might look like this, following the ring-like top view we see in the original map. However, this couldn't be further from the real layout of the Crystal Palace. You see, what could be considered the floors in this layout are actually supposed to be the walls of the Crystal Palace, so a proper layout of its design would be an extremely stretched out rectangle to mimic the rotated surface being laid out. The reasoning behind this actually makes a lot of sense. Obviously, there isn't a gravitational pull when you're in space, so just like any modern astronaut, citizens would just be flying around trying to traverse the city. The architects found a fix to this though, having the toroids spin at a sufficient enough rotation to provide 0.8 G at the rim, mimicking the pull of gravity spinning. When I first read this information, I was actually a bit surprised by the thought put into this design, as I originally thought there would just be some weird excuse or technology for producing gravity. So, who exactly owns this space colony? Well, in short, it's the European Space Agency, also known as the ESA. But they are heavily sponsored by Orbital Air, which is where they get most of their funding. Despite this fact though, it's used by all space-capable nations, each of which maintain an embassy on the palace for its nationals. Living space tends to be leased by the ESA to the highest bidders on a 20-year renewable basis. In turn, the ESA maintains emergency services, general security, and station upkeep. The station also provides military purposes, such as being the testing ground for the Tsunami Airhammer pistol, which is now used as the Crystal Palace's standard for its security force. So, how did this powerful space colony come to be created? Well, there's quite a bit of history to the city that traces itself back to the year 2000, in which the ESA began construction with funding of €7 billion. Only 4 months into construction though, the first corporate war would spark between EBM and Orbital Air. This was a defining moment in Cyberpunk's history, as it was the first conflict of its kind. Direct corporate warfare had never before occurred. So, this was somewhat of a Pandora's box that led the way for the next 3 corporate wars to sprout. While the first corporate war went on to end in a victory for Orbital Air and clear benefit of the ESA and Crystal Palace, construction continued until it would reach its next hiccup. In 2009, a USA quote-unquote terrorist group would attempt an abortive takeover of Crystal Palace construction. However, ESA discovered relatively quickly that this was a defense intelligence agency plot by the USA, in which they responded by utilizing their monopolized mass drivers to drop a 5-ton rock off the coast of Washington, D.C. as a warning. After this, it was no surprise that construction wrapped up smoothly and its doors went on to open in 2011, providing the ESA a permanent hold in the high orbit zone. In the early 2020s, the palace was rumored to be the home of the Angels, a group of at least 12 individuals, each one an elite martial artist, whom were considered the best solos ever. It was from the palace that they would fall upon their targets. Just imagine having a Morgan Blackhand land in front of you after falling from orbit, only to absolutely sweep your ass, then leave. It's this prospect that actually makes this group seem so terrifying, yet hard to believe in. Obviously, they aren't landing on you with no gear or shuttle, they'd likely be in some form of a pod, unless there's some crazy Borg conversions we don't know about that would allow them to. Despite all this, no records of them ever existing were found, but only the words of a number of harsh, prominent solos, which were rather varied. Some claimed to back their existence, while some pointed out the inconsistencies and unrealistic stories. Since this was back during the 2020s, it's hard to say if we will ever know. During the Fourth Corporate War, in late September of 2022, a killsat artillery strike fired at the orbital habitat in the Crystal Palace, seemingly by accident. 3 High Riders intercepted the projectiles and died protecting the station. Later that year, the ESA ordered Delta jets on the Crystal Palace to destroy several suspicious orbital facilities. At the same time, the US and Soviets were doing similar things on other parts of the globe. Despite the order to not attack assets belonging to other nations, a mistake was made, and all 3 nations began to destroy every facility they could find, no matter whom it belonged to. Once the orbital war finished, many satellites and space facilities had been destroyed, but the Crystal Palace endured, likely as a result of its shared prominence in corporations and nations alike. By 2077, not much had changed. The palace had already become the most famous and expansive space station in orbit, continuing to be owned by the ESA and providing all of its services. The only thing that could possibly shake the foundation in which the Crystal Palace has built is a successful heist by the legendary solo, V. Only time will tell if V is capable of pulling off the seemingly impossible task and being the first and likely only solo ever to do so. Who else to start with but the big man himself, the charismatic leader of the Edgerunner crew, Maine. He was born the son of a jazz singer, a woman who traveled around what used to be the lower 48, singing in bars and lounges. Her dream was one of many that drowned in the entertainment industry. Her hope every night, the only thing she cared about, was that some talent scout for a big promoter would hear her and sign her on the spot, a break that many stars before her had been blessed with. Though her time never came, something equally if not more momentous did. The morning after a concert in Portland, Maine, she puked, prompting her to discover that she was pregnant. Her time traveling around didn't allow her much leeway in doing the math and tracking the father. She always made a point of forgetting any lovers she took on, so there wasn't any way of knowing. What she did know though was that she liked Portland, and the state of Maine had always been good to her in small ways, so she decided to settle down. She signed on as a waitress at a local diner and kept at it for a whole 10 years while she raised her son, who she named after the state. Maine was a puny and sickly boy who struggled to get by in the community. On a regular basis, he would get beaten by peers and older kids alike. Maine was becoming sick of always being on the ground, looking up at his attackers, so he promised himself he'd become stronger, bigger and stronger than anyone around. He started with packing on size and strength until he couldn't even be recognized, and picked up fighting in the underground boxing circuit. With his first prize purse, he bought his first bit of chrome, titanium metacarpals and phalanges in his right hand, so as to knock his opponents out on his first solid contact with their jaws. And knock them out he did. After his mama passed away, Maine took jobs as a bouncer at clubs, but he'd rarely stay long at any one place, not with the mincemeat he'd make of the faces of uppity ravers. One night, Maine was provoked by 5 dudes with identical, patriotically themed box cuts. With his size and experience, he slapped them around, not caring who they were. Well, it turned out they were NUSA Spec Ops, and the club, afraid of the consequences, promptly canned Maine. Next day, Maine got a call with a job offer. It was from the NUSA Spec Op. He could let his beast out and get paid for it. Maine figured the math worked out, so he signed without hesitation. It wasn't long before his bravado vanished. It wasn't as simple as beating around some gonk tossing his fist around at you or some noisy punks disturbing the peace. During his service, he watched villages in South America burn one after another, innocents being killed. He just couldn't make sense of it, and after serving 2 years, he took his discharge. A buddy from his unit, Solomon Reed, respected his tenacity and didn't want to let go of a talent like Maine, so he offered work of a different sort, specifically work aimed at building a network of spies in Night City to support the NUSA's Unification War effort. Though Maine turned Solomon down, he did acknowledge that Night City was fertile ground for something, not soldiering, no, but independent contract work. The same position that legends like Johnny Silverhand and Morgan Blackhand found themselves in. And thus, Maine decided to become an Edgerunner and form his own crew. All that's left is the story of how each member joined and their own origin stories. And from there, it's history. Dorio is a veteran Edgerunner and Maine's right-hand crewmate, as well as romantic partner. We previously knew little about her, or how Maine got into contact, but now I can enlighten you. Dorio was born in Iceland, to 2 accomplished athletes as parents. Naturally, Dorio's childhood and youth were a blur, training in gyms, consuming uber-healthy meals, living out of suitcases while traveling from one weightlifting or track meet to the next. Her parents were essentially grooming her to be a world-class athlete. She, like many others, never got to live the life she actually desired, instead being molded by the will of those in her life, just like David Martinez under the wing of Maine. Until that is, Night City turned out to be a stop along the winding path of Dorio. She arrived at NC for a track meet with her family, a West Coast Grand Prix circuit event, and it was this meet that proved transformative for Dorio's pop, though her mom said outright that it had broken him. He emerged as the event's top hammer thrower and collected solid, if not overwhelming, prize money. Then he realized that what he had in hand was peanuts, because he could make so much more by winning a single punch-up on the underground fight circuit run by the Animals. One night, he signed up for one, interested in how it would turn out. It was a hard slog, because anyone vying for membership in the Animals is close to being a world-class athlete in the first place. But as chance would have it, Pops came out on top. The Animals paid out and took him on as a member. Dorio's mom didn't exactly love this. In fact, she didn't like it one bit, but it gave her a comfy life in Night City, so she was complacent. Dorio and her mom could spend their days training and doing whatever they like. The fear and doubt her mom previously held were being quelled. But that mirage would all too soon collapse when a shootout occurred between the Animals and Voodoo Boys, both gangs decked out in heavy weapons. Dorio's pop got caught in full automatic crossfire, the bullets ripping him apart, making nothing but a scrap of his face recognizable just enough to identify him. The family's comfy life came crashing down. But it was never the most important thing. They lived before the Animals, and they could continue living on after. Dorio and her mom lived on modestly and pumped iron day after day. Yet, as it often does for young people, boredom crept in. Dorio's mom had made a conscious decision to be a professional athlete, to sacrifice all else and devote herself. Dorio had not made this decision, and in time she realized it was not the life for her. And there was this hatred of Night City's gangs, which had begun with her father's death and only festered since. She had a special place in the black corner of her heart for the animals and voodoo boys, but there was really fuck all she could do about it as a weightlifter. She skipped a practice here, a meet there, wandering the city streets instead, looking down many dark alleys, searching for something. She didn't know what just yet. Finally, she bought herself a gun. It seemed organic, the natural thing to do. And then, gun in hand, and her mind honed, she trained her gaze on an animal. It was just some random sucker. Nothing particularly stood out about him besides the affiliation. She observed, she followed, she stalked. A thought began to bud in her mind. This gonk, unaware of Dorio or anything that had happened to her, would die. She would kill him and quench her rising hatred. And so one night, she followed him to a bar. She watched him drink, enough to make her sit and stew in her thoughts for a bit too long for her liking. When he got up to use the John, she followed him there. As he vacated his bladder, back turned, she put the barrel of her gun to his head, but she failed to pull the trigger. A split second later, she was on the floor with a broken nose. The animal stood over her, the barrel of her gun now staring in her face, but he didn't fire either, not for reasons of hesitation, but because just then his brain exploded, looking like pieces of glitter on the wall. Maine had dropped him. Maine, who had been stalking Dorio while she'd been stalking the animal, who now helped her up and said he was looking for peeps for his crew of Edgerunners. This was exactly what Dorio had been looking for, and in that same heartbeat, she signed on. Born in the free state of Texas, Falco's parents owned vast swaths of land that they cultivated in close collaboration with Biotechnica. Being born and raised in the field, Falco was due to take the reins at the farm. But a little secret was his favorite bit of work there involved driving tractors. Not quite as prescribed though. He loved to hit the accelerator and keep it down, sending the big machine zipping across the fields at speeds unimaginable to any other tractor drivers. It wasn't conventional, but it was his thing. It wasn't that his tractors were better or that he tweaked their engines. It was just about having the tenacity to do it. Falco swapped his tractor seat for one in a stock car and began entering races on the local circuit. He turned out to be talented. Not only would he open the throttle wide, he also possessed a cool head that allowed him to smoothly execute even the riskiest moves. Pretty soon, he had conquered the local circuit and began considering a more global perspective of the scene, which took him onto the pro racing circuit. He reigned supreme there as well, albeit too easily. After winning an unprecedented dozen-plus races in a row, he started hankering for a new challenge that wouldn't be so straightforward and by the books. The search for that challenge took him to Night City, where he could street race the craziest drivers from around the world on some of the hardest, most dangerous urban courses in existence. He didn't always win, and he liked that. Yet he was among the best, chalking up night race wins against NC's racing greats, Jeremy Taylor and Rear View, the latter being who got him his first paid gig. He collected a couple of Edgerunners, and together they pulled a heist at an orbital air warehouse. The crowd at the Afterlife got to know and like Falco, and he came around to liking the kind of tension that came with gigs he got from fixers. It was a satisfying life, and he mostly dropped racing, only hitting the occasional course as a special guest. It's only after being pushed onto the radar of Arasaka Militech post David's demise that he begins reconsidering his time in Night City. After tying up loose ends and making sure he has his valuables, including multiple mementos of his recently departed friends, he heads south, leaving Night City and the Edgerunners within to form their own upcoming legends. For as far back as Kiwi can remember, she has no recollection of her parents. The unfortunate, likely matter of fact being when she was not much older than a toddler, she was sold to a corp factory where her small hands proved useful in the production of implant sub-assemblies. She worked alongside other kids and machines in the harsh laborious setting, the only semblance of a friendship being the factory foreman who took a liking to her. He protected her, helped her when she needed it, and overall just befriended her. When the time was appropriate, he had promoted her, gave her raises, and ensured some level of comfort, all while doing so under the guise of goodwill. But nothing is free in Night City. The time came for payback. He propositioned her, framing it as a debt Kiwi owed. When she refused, the foreman sold her off to a den of iniquity. Her tech knowledge from the factory and savviness about sub-assemblies, microcontrollers, and shards helped her survive the next 2 years, but not in the best of conditions. She built a gizmo that inured her to sensations and cut off all emotional responses to the work she had to do. 2 years in, a brutish client used his gorilla arms to tear away a part of her jaw. She concluded she would not have it reconstructed. She was done with her jaw, and the cat house as well. Kiwi had been a quick learner for as long as she could remember. So, while recovering from her encounter with the gorilla arms, she delved into net running. She found it satisfyingly challenging, which kept her motivated. Soon, she would use her newly acquired abilities to cause multiple short circuits at both the cat house and her old factory, causing both buildings to burn down completely, with the proprietor and foreman inside, of course. With all accounts now settled and a mask covering the lower half of her face, Kiwi decided to embark on a new life path. She headed off for Night City, where she took on small netrunning gigs. Then, she met Rebecca, who in turn brought Kiwi into Maine's Edgerunner crew. Though 2 major factors prevented her from blending in with the group, she was always the one standing off on her own. The previous trauma she had endured had prevented her from forming any trust or familial bonds with another person, and the fact she had been a replacement for a netrunner before her that had been killed in an op against Biotechnica. Kiwi would live her entire life not forming a single true friendship. Pilar is the big bro of Becca's, and their dad is an Edgerunner known as Papa Sunrise. It was Papa Sunrise who inspired Pilar and trained him in his early years. Pilar took some hard shots, and it pained his dad to see, but they stayed the course. But suddenly, his father up and disappeared. But someone that impressive? Well, no way he went down easy. No way it was even fair. Pilar was easily the biggest fan of his father, and saw him as nothing short of amazing. Pilar fervently believed his dad was dropped and dissolved. He pledged to find the killers and to murder them in ways even worse than what they could have done to his father. But first and foremost, he had his little sister to take care of. This wasn't an easy task by any means, made only harsher by the life their father had left behind for them. The family's pad was quickly repossessed to settle Papa Sunrise's alleged gambling debts, and the eddies from the family account evaporated mysteriously. So Pilar and his sister hit the streets to live there in their dad's broken down car. Pilar promised Rebecca he'd get them off the streets fast, no matter what. He'd just show the town just how solid a merc he is. He'd be a well-known Edgerunner in days, well, maybe weeks, if we're being generous. But some, or even most of his dad's friends and acquaintances, turned their backs on the kids. Only a few, especially Wakako, who Pilar called Auntie, proved willing to help, giving him gigs and recommending him to others. Still, the going was tough. Something always seemed to get in the way of bagging the big score. After a while, Pilar realized what his problem was. It was his chaotic sister, Becca. She was sinking every mission they went on. He needed help to rein her in, so he signed on with Maine and his Edgerunner crew. Finally, he was on the path to realizing his dream of becoming a Night City legend. Night City, born and bred, Becca's a true daughter of the town, having ventured outside city limits a whopping 2 times in total. She is the daughter of NC royalty. Her father, Papa Sunrise, was one of the city's best known Edgerunners, until he suddenly vanished, as if the ground had opened beneath him and swallowed him whole. Now orphans, Becca and her big bro were forced to fend for themselves in the big city. Their mother was already long gone, vanished when Rebecca was a mere 6 years of age. Papa Sunrise never liked to talk about her, except to admonish Becca for being just like her mom. Emotional, unpredictable, and just too compassionate. That was Rebecca in a nutshell, and it certainly harmed her budding career as an Edgerunner. For example, she was once late to an important meetup with Wakako because she stood up for a defenseless waitress accosted by a crew of animals. On another, she just had to stop and cuddle a painfully cute pup, thus garnering the attention of a group of passing scavs. Another time, instead of blowing a target's brains out, she spared him and took him home, giving him a roof over his head. Had such sad eyes, the poor gonk, she said. Papa Sunrise always believed that Becca's zaniness and her excessive compassion could lead her to an early grave, and those traits formed a rift between her and her brother as they embarked on their edge-running careers. For a time, Rebecca wasn't even sure she wanted to be an Edgerunner. She spent months soul searching, and for a minute there, she was leaning towards a no. But with perfect timing, Pilar introduced her to Maine, and the rest is history, though she never quite overcame that emotional side of her. Sasha is the original Netrunner of Maine's crew, later being replaced by Kiwi. She isn't mentioned in the Edgerunners anime, as her story is confined to that of the Let You Down music video, though there's plenty to take away from it, and the appearance of her sister Stella Ramos in Phantom Liberty. Sasha was the daughter of Galina Valieva. Her mother died when she was a child as a result of the crippling and fatal side effects of Biotechnica painkillers, specifically Securacine. In adulthood, Sasha became a part of Maine's crew of Edgerunners as a Netrunner. One night, after getting drinks in the afterlife, her crew was hired to infiltrate Biotechnica's Night City HQ to extract secret financial records on Chew 2 and information on a new immunosuppressant prototype. After Maine set up a jammer on the building's communications, Sasha infiltrated the facility. After getting the information she was after, Sasha discovered confidential files on Securacine, the painkillers her mother used while she was sick. The main side effect of the painkiller included gradual neurodegeneration, and despite this being known, Biotechnica decided that the drug was just too profitable and couldn't be pulled from the market. Sasha, determined to do right by her mother, started to upload the entire Securacine database to the Network 54 news tip line. The communications jammer hadn't been set to last for this prolonged mission though, and Sasha was discovered, prompting a group of Biotechnica security robots to home in on her location. She locked the door and prepared a set of explosives. Maine tried to contact her, but knowing she wasn't going to make it out, Sasha cut off the connection line with her crew. Once the security breached the door, Sasha held down the line while making sure that information got sent. Although she managed to complete the upload, Sasha got shot through the window, and the explosives she had set got activated, destroying the office she was in. Maine found her body after caving in the roof of a pedestrian's vehicle. Her death had revealed the disturbing fate of her mother and many other victims to the public, but Biotechnica remained. Speaking of a car roof being crushed, we find ourselves at a bonus biography, the backstory of Atom Smasher. While his story has been well documented, even on my channel, this is a to-the-point summary that even has an interesting theory near the end. I doubt you want to miss it. The truth is, we don't know much about Atom Smasher in terms of a complete biography. After all, he's been alive for nearly a century, and any story we tell would probably be more legend than truth, not to mention the long gaps in time that leave behind nothing but rumors. According to an article he wrote for Solo of Fortune back in the 2020s, he was born and raised in New York, where he led a combat gang before enlisting in the military. Adam spent 6 years in the Marine Corps before they kicked him out. Afterwards, he went full Edgerunner, specializing in nasty and destructive jobs. A couple of rocket-propelled grenades ended that career, but began another when Arasaka found him, stuffed his brain into a Borg body, and signed him to a lifelong contract. We know Adam was active up to and during the Fourth Corporate War. He specialized and took joy in leading strike forces to slaughter communities full of not only enemies, but their families as well. Rumors place him in Arasaka's Night City HQ when the nuke went off, in a duel against Militech's legendary Morgan Blackhand. A clash of ideologies. If so, the metal bastard survived the blast and fell off the radar, the decades following being nothing but stories of an unstoppable metal juggernaut running ops around the globe. How much is true remains a mystery to this day. All we know for sure is he's currently back in Night City after years away, or someone claiming to be him is. Maybe the real Atom Smasher died during the nuke, and Arasaka brainwashed some poor full-body conversion, or multiple, into believing he's the genuine article. Weirder things have happened after all. At least, this is the idea Artauzorian is teasing at. I mean, who's to say how he returned? Soul killer, brainwashing, using full-body conversions as dolls? Who's to say, other than Mike Pondsmith himself? We know a lot about David Martinez. Hell, we have an entire anime about him. But what we don't already know is the story of his parents and his early life. The journey of his mother and father can only be compared to the likes of those old rom-coms. A big city, a man, and a woman walking down the street. The woman suddenly stops due to a contraction, a big one that knocks the wind out of her. The guy flags down the first available cab. He and the woman clumsily tumble into the back seat, and the cab speeds off for the hospital. David Martinez came into the world in somewhat similar circumstances, kind of. David's mom, an EMT named Gloria, felt her water break while she was in the back of her speeding ambulance, trying to reattach the arm of an Edgerunner who had gotten it shot off. Yep, this scenario is very romantic. It's actually comparable to Shakespeare if you ask me. That guy was a freak. So she sutured, and got it done, all while fighting against her own body. Finally, she told the Edgerunner to swap seats with her and proceeded to deliver her own baby on the gurney, all while the ambulance was still speeding towards a hospital. The Edgerunner alongside her cut the umbilical cord using the mantis blade in the arm Gloria had just salvaged. Brutal, yet somehow poetic. It was at that moment that Gloria and David were bonded in awareness that she would do absolutely anything for him, and he would never let her down. Life in Santo Domingo certainly wouldn't be a rose garden. The exact opposite, actually. But they had each other. Trash, filth, dwarfers, psychos, and death at every corner. Gloria did her damnedest to shelter David from all manner of danger. Thing is, David just never liked the peaceful, mundane side of life. It bored him out of his skull. Yeah, David liked to have lots going on, liked it when shit went down, because as long as he could remember, he had the feeling he was destined for something bigger. Clearly a consequence of his absurd birth. So he scoped and kept tabs on anyone and everyone in and around Mega Building H4, and any Edgerunner he'd not seen before, David would talk his ear off. Soon as the local Dripper Dock had new chrome, you bet David would be in his clinic, ogling it. With all that curiosity bursting out of him, there'd be times he'd get his ass kicked too. But the curiosity wouldn't die, and David never thought to curb it. This one time, the son of a 6th Street gang goon, while pissed off at David, found him, pinned him down, and started punching away. He kept punching until he finally broke his own hand, and promptly started wailing like a little bitch with everybody watching. David, covered in blood, his own and theirs, laughed all the way through the beating and for an hour after it, which pretty much meant no one in the hood would touch David ever again. And David was reassured that he was special, that he would do great things in life. He'd keep that bigger than life attitude all the way up to his death in a blaze of glory. Born in Warsaw to a Polish-Japanese family, Lucy's father, Takeshi Kushinada, was a veteran of the Fourth Corporate War. When hostilities ended, he was assigned to the Arasaka garrison in Warsaw. Her mother, Shimmer, a member of a gang of Polish netrunners called 404 Squadron, dropped the underground life after meeting Takeshi, falling in love, and starting a family with him. Lucy's childhood was positively idyllic. She attended the best schools, and she and her family lacked for nothing. Traveled frequently, and while home, enjoyed a spacious villa and garden in a luxury, gated Arasaka community near Warsaw's northeastern city limits. The first blemish of their family bliss appeared when 7-year-old Lucy hacked into her dad's computer and found info of his quote-unquote achievements during the Fourth Corporate War. What she saw shocked her. She knew him as a wondrous father, but the files proved him to be a brutal beast, a monster who happily murdered mercilessly whenever his superiors ordered him to. The revelation planted something sour in Lucy's chest, a stinging, a burning that commanded her to rebel, to run away from home, and to spend more and more time on the net. She proved to have a talent for net running of the highest order. Her father, after recovering her from her latest adventure, decided to couple this talent with her penchant for running away. He forced his daughter to take a skills test at Arasaka, after which she was promptly assigned to the Corps Netrunner outfit. Lucy's task was recovering old, lost, or archived info and data resting somewhere in the depths of the old net. Arasaka was drooling for info of the sort, as it was all blocked off by the Black Wall. But as time went on, kids from Lucy's division started dying, dropping like flies. And Lucy, once again, decided to run. She made it out, but thought it best not to go home, fearing what her father would do if she returned. Instead, Lucy skipped across to Europe, sometimes trying to settle down. Only whenever Lucy dared to rest, she could sense her mother, who had rejoined 404 Squadron, zeroing in on her. Uncertain of her mother's intentions, Lucy packed up and fled, again and again and again, until she finally found herself on the other side of the Atlantic, After roaming a good number of states, Lucy wound up in Night City, thinking that no place on Earth was destined to be her safe harbor. So she promised herself she'd amass the funds needed to flee to Luna. She started with petty thefts, rarely, if ever, training her sights on fatter loot. Until that is, she met Kiwi, another Netrunner who gently folded Lucy into Maine's crew, where she would remain until David succeeded in his mission to send her to the moon. Just to be thorough, I want to start off by explaining a few ideas that are relatively obvious. As a result of Cyberpunk's world being a dystopian prediction of ours, it shares a large portion of our real-life religions and beliefs. I'm sure you have an idea if you've read the Cyberpunk sourcebooks. Major beliefs like Islam, Catholicism, and Christianity are still extremely prevalent worldwide, but because of Cyberpunk's world branching off in the 20th century and being 5 decades out from even our current time, also the data crash, you just don't see a lot of it up front in places like Night City, though of course you'll still find followers and places of worship. While many of these beliefs don't really need much explanation, seeing as the majority of people watching already have an understanding of them, there's some interesting distinctions in history that I'll go over. Judaism as a whole hasn't fared well in the post-collapse period, with the problems in the Middle East and the cessation of Israeli relations in the wake of the Mid-East meltdown, an event that was also known as the Suicide War, a series of nuclear conflicts in the Middle East that occurred in 1997, one of the many after effects of the crash of '94. The fallout of such a disaster leaves Israel unlikely to ever forgive America for the lack of warning in that crisis, also leaving Jews in America feeling cut off and alone. Despite Israel, of course, offering a homeland for any Jew who could make the trip itself was easier said than done. However, there remained nomad tribes such as the Blaine family that continued to practice Judaism amongst other smaller cultures that have allowed the belief to survive in the US. But despite its small presence, the synagogues and followers left have a fierce and loyal following. Buddhism is of course a combination of religion, philosophy, and psychology, seeking fulfillment of life by removing one's concept of self and following the 8 practices, a way of life viewed as ever more undesirable by the increasing number of criminals and guns for hire. This of course includes the average Edgerunner, though that doesn't mean it has no presence or hasn't even grown. In the 21st century, it's actually seen significant growth in America, both in membership and popularity due to influxes of Indian and Zen philosophy in the nation. A key separation in Cyberpunk's Buddhist presence is their fascination with the net, which lays out an ideal setting of exploration of thought, utilizing directionless exploration of the net as their medium to deny themselves the concept of self. Think about the way the Zen master in 2077 utilizes BDs for meditation and inner healing. There's a lot more to it than what meets the eye. One of the most practiced religions in Night City, and the official religion of Japan, is Shintoism, a belief that revolves around supernatural entities called the Kami, a presence believed to inhabit all things. There are around 80,000 public shrines in Japan, with an alleged 113 million adherents. In Night City, a Shinto shrine can be visited in Westbrook, as well as many torii gates found around the city. The Shinto shrine is said to be a place of worship and the dwellings of the Kami. Since Mormons are, as a tenet of their faith, required to keep a year's supply of food for their family, this allowed a greater proportion of Mormons to survive the collapse. Although the Mormons have been accused of being both fascist and racist by some critics, they are, and will probably remain, one of the most powerful blocs in the West. The Scientologists have also fared better than most, likely due to their skill in using media and an immense amount of stored wealth. During the collapse, large numbers of believers were lost in both Florida and California, but the sect has been rebuilt through skillful advertising. Despite its reputation as mysticism, many people in the Western Hemisphere practice voodoo and related religions. Although voodoo and Santeria are based in Brazil, other South American states, and even Africa, its influences can be felt in modern cities around the world. These faiths are often based on concepts of a spirit world, controlling various aspects of nature and humanity. Ritual dances allow believers to ascend into a state from which voodoo spirits may enter and take over the dancer's body. Once contacted, these spirits are asked to perform services for their followers in the form of spells. Popularized in flat reel films, voodoo spells often include various curses, from mild sickness to death, along with potions for love and mind control. Voodoo's iconistic system and relative lack of writings make it an ideal religion in the new age of the net. Furthermore, practitioners of voodoo see interesting parallels between their teachings and the modern world. They argue that things like jacking into the net, thereby dislodging the focus of one's consciousness, is similar to the practice of channeling or accepting a spirit into one's body. Modern voodoo curses are not cast with dolls, rather, the caster merely burns a memory chip containing a VR simulation of the spell's effect. Now imagine this in the timeline of 2077, in which talented netrunners can perform quick hacks, so invasively that they can trigger audio and visual hallucinations, even controlling their bodies to perform unthinkable acts. We could see some seriously disturbing netrunners in the future, connected to voodoo practices. While some of this can be seen with the presence of the Voodoo Boys in Cyberpunk 2077 and their probing of the Black Wall, there's a lot more that could be explored. While a couple of the previous beliefs may be considered a cult by some, I would like to speak on the more prevalent philosophical beliefs during this time period, before beginning the cult portion of this video. This way, you have more insight and understanding of the different groups and their beliefs. The word Luddite is a late Victorian term used to describe a doctrine that fears technology. In the popular context, Luddites use terrorism and sabotage to accomplish their aims. The word itself comes from the name of a fictional hero of the times, Ned Ludd, who epitomized the doctrine by pitching his wooden shoes into a factory machine and destroying it. Well, I just lied. In reality, there was no real Ned Ludd. He was a mythical symbol created by the thousands of disenfranchised English textile workers who were put out of work by the advent of the steam-powered loom. While the authorities combed the murky street looking for a mythological leader, the original Luddites took to the streets, burning and pillaging, enough to get them a spot in the history books. It's important to remember that the true Luddite is more than just anti-technology. He is also willing to become violent in order to achieve his goals. For example, although groups like the Amish are definitely anti-tech, they are not violent, and therefore not considered Luddites. However, groups like the cult-like Inquisitors would be considered Luddites due to their acts of violence against users of tech. More on that later in the video. Unlike their forebears, Luddites of today do not wish a return to the ways of pre-industrial England. These Luddites are looking for a return to a more personal society, a society that isn't littered with the casualties of cyberpsychosis, the chaos of industrial waste, or the advent of bioproducts. While factions certainly differ within the movement, most agree that a different world order is needed. The nihilists represent those who have given up on the human race entirely, usually dismissed as crazies. Their ability to survive as a cohesive movement belies this. True nihilists have a code, a set of beliefs. Nihilism is usually considered a sect or group of neo-Luddism. While the two groups may hold some of the same beliefs, it is safe to say they differ on one major point. Luddites believe the man still controls his collective destiny. Nihilists, however, believe we are no longer men, but animals, slaves to the machines we have created. What follows are the clear tenets of nihilism. We cannot comprehend our world. The generations before us have created one that we cannot abide. Things happen that are not controlled by men. Whether these new controllers are demons or just machines is irrelevant. As rulers of this earth, we have failed. The globe is choked with the reminders of our filth. Nothing is sacred. We have killed all life here with careless disregard. Since we cannot stop these things, we chose to not remain a part of this society. Death is the truest form of expression, on our own terms and our time. In the Edgerunner era, nihilists now embrace death in all forms. The most recent is art terrorism, but the nihilists of a few years ago simply wanted less tech in their lives. Only since the release of terrorist bioplagues and alterations in DNA have they given up hope. Technohumanism is a new movement that has gained a recent following in young people, especially the academic community. This is due to the rise in a few rocker bands that subscribe to the theory, as well as a great amount of support from the net subculture. The ideal of technohumanism holds that since man is now controlling his own evolution, what we will become is beyond our current comprehension. There are 5 stages to the philosophy. Stage 1 is called the body. It assumes that before we were sentient, we were physical. We had arms and legs to travel and to manipulate the world around us. We had the family group as a society unit and tended to care for our own. It is important to note that this first stage took into account no real change. We struggled against change constantly. The body was, however, not truly complete until the second stage of evolution, called the mind, which allowed man to create a much more coherent social structure, as well as a great deal of the foundation of this evolutionary philosophy. As the mind and body began to work together, man developed a tolerance for change. Though this sometimes failed, it allowed a new society to form, prizing knowledge above the physicality of the body, and allowing the development of the third stage, this being technology. As we allow the machines of our society to make the little day-to-day changes that we have grown accustomed to, we allow ourselves to resist the larger changes ahead. Many feel this is what ultimately caused the collapse. It was in this stage as well that man began a second integration. Man, who was made up of the mind and body, now sought to graft technology onto himself. And since technology evolves at least 100 times as fast as man, there was a breakdown. The nature of this breakdown is a heated topic of debate. Half the people who follow technohumanism are in disagreement as to where we are in this phase. Half feel we are in the technology stage, and therefore have a larger breakdown coming. The other half feel that we have already entered the 4th stage, called the fugue. It is a chrysalis stage. Whatever we are to become will be evident after this stage has already passed. Man will not fully integrate the tech he has made a part of himself until he has emerged from the fugue. All of this change with the acceleration of tech will evolve within the span of a generation. 40 years or a little more, it will be the mightiest change in all of humanity. The last stage in this chain is called rebirth. It is a time of healing, a time when we atone for the thoughtless things we have done to our world and its people. With rebirth comes a sort of nirvana, a place of shining cities where all manners of men and women may live in peace and harmony with our world, maybe even with other worlds. What does this all mean? Well, it's a positive note that, like all philosophies, technohumanists see a chance to create a future golden age, if only the world will listen. As with all great movements in our history, however, the true believers must wait and hope and maybe even pray. Maoism is the belief that the world and everything in it at its core is evil. Humans were born in sin and will live and die in sin. People who believe in Maoism mainly pray for the end of times or Armageddon to wipe out everything and end the suffering. Not much else to say on this one, as I haven't found much prevalent activity in the cyberpunk era. Realism is a relatively small religion based in many of the more technically advanced cities. Realists believe that the real universe is something unbeknownst by us, as we are living in a perfect VR simulation without the ability to breach it. Different sects occur within this doctrine, but many believe that all the religion's members are gods, who are born with their never-ending existence and have created this simulation just to pass time. And now, we have arrived at what is likely for many the most interesting, if not sometimes disturbing, portion of this video: cults. But I'll do us all a favor and start with one of the more goofy groups. By far the most infamous landmark in Memphis is Graceland, the home of the LoFi. Yes, that's right, there is an Elvis Presley poser gang. During the collapse, many Elvis fans flocked to Graceland for lack of any better structure to their lives. Kept from their idol by guards, the crowd rapidly grew unruly and overwhelmed the mansion. During this time of chaotic upheavals, the story of Elvis was deliberately twisted by an exploitative, power-hungry man named Jackson. He molded the legend of Elvis into a mutant religion, a sick parody of Christianity, which quote-unquote proves that Elvis was foretold in the Gospels, complete with resurrection, signs, appearances in shopping malls, and the like. Jackson himself was a cosmetic surgeon who had been forbidden to practice due to certain indiscretions, but that didn't stop him from molding the followers into the likeness of Elvis in return for their support and obedience. After a few years, Jackson disappeared under mysterious circumstances, which further added to the mystery of this new religion. Now, the LoFi were going full steam ahead, and even boast several hundred members living in and around Graceland. They are a sort of psychotic commune, and their continuous loud music has caused nearby neighborhoods to be abandoned. Their major source of income appears to be fencing stolen goods, prostitution, drug trafficking, and selling quote-unquote authentic holy items. It makes a lot more sense that someone like Adam Smasher would have a body identical to Elvis when these are the types of people who pose as him. Maybe Smasher is a big fan of them, or even a member. With the presence of Christianity, naturally comes the presence of Satanism. While not being a true religion, considering it is rather the pure rejection or opposition of Christianity, it still maintains worshippers, composed often of booster gangs or rocker boys that meet in small groups, even having differing variations of Satanism spread between. By the year of 2020, there was still no notable central church that had been formed for this following. But despite the lack of authority, the group as a whole declared war against the coalition against the Satanic Fellowship of the Gods. Yeah, that's a mouthful. Well, what is this group about? The name probably made that obvious, but they're a lot more extreme than you might initially assume. Considered one of the most paranoid groups on the planet, they have an entire system of belief based on the assumption that a group of evil entities control the destiny of the entire human race. Fortunately, in their scripture, good gods exist, but in order to enable them to win, they must quote-unquote weaken the grip of evil on the world. Well, what does this mean? Well, killing various prominent persons they believe are used as puppets, of course, using suicidal tactics difficult to counter by security forces. Corporations were being forced to consider a counter-cleansing procedure in the 2020s. Though not much is known currently, it seemed to have worked out pretty well in the Corp's favor. The beatified Circle of the Celts are a small sect living in isolated communities far from any city, mainly composed of people who run away from fear and aggression of modern life. The Circle tries to guide its flock back to the old Celtic ways of communion with nature, led by a group of elders called Druids. They are a peace-loving group who just wants to be left alone. They can usually be found either working on their farms or in whatever is left of forest, carrying out worship of trees. Given the scarcity of wood, it is only a matter of time before a corporation tries to get rid of them. Typically, this group is in the West or Pacific Northwest regions of the USA, where they'll be trying to save remaining second growth forests and renovate acid-washed third and fourth growth cover, often having arrangements with nomad groups to run them supplies or to provide shelter to travelers. Good-hearted punks might even come across them being attacked by AgriCorp goons and decide to help out. While this group can certainly be considered weird, they're not hurting anyone by any means. At least the majority aren't. They just want to help preserve the beautiful landscape as it used to be known. The Immortal Pyramid is a strange group that believes human beings to be nothing more than particularly intelligent animals. Therefore, humans don't have souls and thus do not survive death. This religion draws heavily upon the beliefs and ideas of the ancient Egyptian pantheon. Although the ancient Egyptians considered life after death a fact, the cult has disregarded this and proclaimed the gods were actually a mix of animal and man, proving beyond a doubt that man is an animal and nothing more. Not really though. This has led to an obsession with avoiding death. Cult members are very cautious, always carrying or wearing various forms of protective equipment, and fleeing from any mildly dangerous situation. They are currently trying to find enough money to build an enormous data center shaped like a pyramid. If they succeed, they will try to download their minds into the memory banks and wait in safety until someone finds a way to make them truly immortal. These followers are usually found in northeastern universities, often hiring out Edgerunners to help locate Egyptian artifacts or as hired guns against any conflicting groups. Maybe the group got what they wished for thanks to Arasaka, or perhaps even Old Cunningham. What would be more valuable than willing participants to the Soul Killer program? The worshippers of the night are closer to a vigilante group than a cult, garbed in all-white armored clothing. Okay, never mind, that sounded a lot worse when I said it. I think they're a cult. They roam the streets at night to quote-unquote protect the night's holiness against the evil that surrounds us. Considering that night is a time of rest and of spiritual purification, which should be available to everyone, the worshippers have decided to make the ultimate sacrifice and sleep in the day, thus keeping the night safe for the rest of us. How lucky we are. Despite their reliance on donations, they are often funded by corporations for short periods of time. Several companies like to have the sect patrol their areas because they are less costly than mercenaries, don't require hazard pay, and will fight to the bitter end. On the other hand, they don't work during the day, so that's a pretty big employment issue. These small groups are spread nationwide, typically forming or migrating wherever they are needed. The sect espouses a mix of Euro-maximalist doctrine and identification with such ancient religious knighthoods such as the Templars. I mean, they're even considering applying to the Catholic Church to be recognized as a warrior group. So if you're on their good side, these guys don't seem so bad to keep around. Digital Divinity Incorporated was founded upon the idea that the net is the first thing made by man, which is infinite, and thus it's proof of mankind's own godhood. The net is therefore the center of this godhood. It is the divinity, nativity in one. The DDI faith preaches that interfacing with the net is like communion with true self, that thought in pure electronic form is a heavenly or nirvana-like experience. According to DDI, their beliefs are unlike those of any other religion, and proves all other religions wrong. I've heard that one before. Canceling out their external gods, and is touted as the Ragnarok of old religion. In fact, DDI preaches that it is the next step in man's spiritual evolution. As the physical world deteriorates, the net is man's destiny, a sort of advanced existence. By embracing the net now, while there's still an Earth, one accepts and knows the way of the universe. Not to be outdone by the old religions, DDI has established Deus, an entity in the net claiming to be divine. Today, DDI is a sensation, the in vogue religion, with its following growing every day. Since it is such a remarkably multifaceted phenomenon with technological, philosophical, and religious implications, it is perfectly suited to its age. It is the perfect blend of spirituality and technology, wrapped in a marketable multimedia package, making it an easily accessible belief to current and upcoming generations. Being one of the few cults currently mentioned in the Time of Red, not much is known about the Reckoners. They take some philosophy from Maoism, since they're a doomsday cult that appeared in Night City after the Fourth Corporate War, from the ashes of the Night City Holocaust naturally. They believe in a coming event known as the Harvest of Souls, and are known for collecting quote-unquote donations by force. Not all members are so patient to let nature or history take its own course, as many of them have an itch to begin the harvest themselves. What that entirely entails, though, is unknown. The final group is as much a cult as they are a gang. The Inquisitors hate all forms of cyberware, considering it to be evil and blasphemous, though this isn't to be confused with technology in general, as it's specifically a hate for man becoming machine. They rely only on training and BioWare enhancements in their war against every gang of Night City, drawing hate from pretty much everyone, most of which will literally just kill them on sight. It is unknown where their home turf is, if they even have one. The Inquisitors were responsible for the death of the younger brother of Hackman, the leader of the Blood Raisers, so a standing reward of 25,000 eddies was in place for anyone who could capture their leader and bring him to them. Said leader either evaded capture or was replaced, seeing as the gang is still active in 2045. Practicing their so-called soul saving of tearing cyberware out of people's bodies. But they haven't been seen in 2077, so maybe that bounty came around. The origins of Cyberpsychosis date back to the first official release of the tabletop RPG by Mike Pondsmith and Art Talzorian, Cyberpunk 2013. Here was the working definition at the time, just to get the point across. Something happens when you start adding metal and plastic to people. They start to change, and it isn't pretty. In 2013, we call this cyberpsychosis, a mental disease in which the addition of cybernetics causes an already unstable personality to fragment. At first, the victim begins to relate more to machines than to humans. Soon, they start to ignore people, including parents, friends, and lovers. Eating and sleeping even becomes less important to them. Finally, human interactions begin to irritate, culminating in a terrifying rage that consumes the victim entirely. How this condition plays out is important to the discussion. So, how does it? Well, each piece of cybernetic equipment has a corresponding humanity cost, and for every 10 humanity, a character will lose 1 point of empathy, progressively turning even the most joyful of people to forbidding and distinctly unpleasant to even violent, sociopathic, and vicious. But once that empathy rate reaches 0, the character is fully in the grip of cyberpsychosis, driven to a maddening hatred of other humans or living things. At this point, it's alleged even in the books that there's no going back. The character is taken over by the referee, who plays it as an NPC with all the worst attributes of a murderous, mechanized psychopath, all the way up until another Edgerunner, or even MaxTac, flatlines the gonk. And this is how it's typically treated by both in-game sources and fans, an unrecoverable condition that is either true or false, a binary perspective that's entirely connected to how much chrome you have, but that's a misconception. Remember how cyberpsychosis tied into the concept of empathy. Some people are going to have much more to spare than others, and because of that, some people can tiptoe the line of going full Borg without experiencing symptoms, while others will flare up from a single implant. Here's a great statement from Mike Pondsmith that clears up some info from his Reddit account. Okay, so time to partially explain cyberpsychosis. First of all, it's a disorder that in part depends on the subject's overall internal susceptibility. Just like every person who drinks a lot at parties doesn't end up in alcoholic in the gutter, not everyone who gets loaded up on cyberware is going to automatically go cyberpsycho. You have to have an inherent susceptibility, which in the TTRPG is represented by the player's humanity stat. Humanity is not just a measure of one aspect of personality, but an overall measure of several elements, including the subject's ability to empathize and relate with others, their ability to absorb and rebound from mental and physical stressors, their ability to show compassion and flexibility to others, and whether they are able to balance their worldview through other methods. So in some ways, I tend to treat cyberware as an addiction. Heavy anabolic steroid use being my favorite model. Not everyone who juices ends up crazy mad with roid rage, but those who are more susceptible to the need to take more steroids are more likely to hit a point where they do flip into roid rage. David's starting humanity was probably already pretty high, and before things went to crap, he had a loving mother, a career path, and no more hassle than the average poor guy in a wealthy Ivy League school, so he had lots of buffer. But even then, he still, even after losing all that, was able to make friends, build a replacement family, and after some prompting, even get a girlfriend, and a mentor. Maine, to create a supportive father figure, so he could definitely handle the stress of added cyberware up to a point. Most people in Night City don't have the level of humanity to pull this kind of stunt off without going cyberpsychotic, so David is 1 in a million, and that's why Arasaka wants him. So that's a rough explanation of the roots of cyberpsychosis. And no, cyberpsychosis isn't caused by AI net demons. Give me a break, chooms. So knowing what's stated in source books and from the literal author is important, but how about in universe? Well, I think the best way to do so is looking at the various shards in 2077. The most important to lead with being a shard found in various locations throughout the game, meaning the devs really wanted you to see this. It's a manifesto titled The Truth About Cyberpsychosis. I've had enough of the senseless shootings that claim hundreds of innocents every day. I'm sick of the satire on empty, dead-end, implant restriction dialogue. I'm tired of ignoring the cyberpsychosis problem. In American society today, there are still a lot of common myths and misconceptions about the so-called technology-related personality disorder. People think they can become infected in sketchy Ripper Doc clinics. Scientists allegedly disagree about the causes of the disease, or even about whether it exists at all. Maybe their tune would change if a cyberpsycho turned their lab into a slaughterhouse. But even then, I doubt it. They're not getting fat paychecks from the cyberware lobby just to openly declare to the public all the nasty possible side effects that come packaged with their products. I've conducted my own research on cyberpsychosis. With supreme confidence, I can confirm this illness is indeed a byproduct of the modern lifestyle and the obsessive emphasis placed on incorporating modern tech into our lives. Although cybernetic implants can directly affect our brain chemistry, they still serve only as a catalyst for the onset of the disease. Our world is subject to extensive dehumanization. We surround ourselves with increasingly more automated machines and artificial intelligences. Our loved ones replace their nature-given eyes, lips, and faces with masks of metal. Some of us begin to lose sight of what is human. We slip into feelings of total alienation and deep-rooted panic. We lose the ability to distinguish between what is real and what is only artificial, digital, synthetic. Such people begin to isolate themselves, lose their empathy for others, and undergo dramatic mood swings that exhibit sadistic tendencies. The most frightening component to all of this is that most will never be diagnosed. Not all cyberpsychos are known war veterans or former mercenaries equipped with Sandivistan reflex tech. Not all will go out in a blaze of gunfire with Bax tack. Many cyberpsychos in our world possess only a single implant, a knee, a liver. They are unseen, unnoticed. They lock themselves up and shut out their friends, colleagues, and loved ones. The world outside of the net and their delusions has disappeared from conscious thought. They are sick and alone, and no one is doing a thing about it. There is no eloquent summary to be made here. Let the value of this manifesto be measured by the fact that I was expelled from the Zeta Tech Cybernetics research team for having written it. This shard shows a clear disconnect between the definition in the source books and the definition in universe. In universe, it's made clear that big cyberware pays off scientists and organizations to not disclose the side effects of their technology, especially pertaining to its exaggeration of pre-existing illness. The average citizen views it as an infection, likely leading to the continuous uptick of cyberpsychosis cases throughout the world. But Cyberpunk 2077 shards have something else to reveal in an entry titled, "Can Cyberpsychosis Be Cured?" Can cyberpsychosis be cured? Opinions on that question are divided. Only a few years ago, so-called brain dance therapy was used across the entire country on a mass scale with the aim of bringing the sick back from the point of no return. The patient would be placed on a special chair and connected to a device that would deactivate all implants. Then electrodes would be attached, inducing the patient into a coma-like brain dance session. This was then followed up by medicine, psychosurgery, and the aversion therapy. The overall treatment was intended to sever all the patient's neural connections and tie them back so that the cyberpsycho could return to society. Once the therapy was concluded, no symptoms of cyberpsychosis were detected, as well as the patient's former personality. But don't worry, nowadays other methods are used. At least, that's what they tell us. So what was previously considered a condition impossible to come back from is apparently recoverable? Well, this kinda just sounds like a fancy way to dress up lobotomization, but it's something, right? I mean, it's even claimed at the end that there's other possible methods. Yet it has to be understood that any cures are likely inhumane or band-aid fixes, such as abusing immunosuppressants like Maine or David, which should be obvious, seeing as Regina Jones has a fixation on trying to find a cure for the disease, which is honestly made all the more confusing by the fact that there are at least 2 MaxTac agents who were previous cyberpsychos. One such being Ares in the 2010s, put in charge of the Night City Cyberpsycho Squad after personality reconditioning, and the second being Melissa Rory in the 2070s, a cyberpsycho shown in teaser trailers for 2077 and seen in-game as a MaxTac agent after reconditioning. An entry found in an NCP computer has this to say. Based on the latest research on the subject, it appears the patient suffers from relapses of antisocial behaviors. The recommended treatment approach is limited environmental stimulation and increased doses of neuroleptics. I'll remind you this is not an isolated case, but a fairly common problem among members of MaxTac. The NCPD is pushing for more resources to be put into cyberpsychosis research, but our facility simply can't accommodate an uptick right now. So it seems like there isn't some magic cure-all solution, but through reconditioning, therapy, lobotomization, or immunosuppressants, you can bring cyberpsychos back to the edge, albeit with varying results. Let's go ahead and organize the 4 different reasons someone might experience cyberpsychosis, or what at least appears to be cyberpsychosis. You see, there's a difference between the two. The actual definition obviously ties it entirely to pre-existing tendencies or psychosis being amplified by implants, while the in-universe definition is shaky at best and actually ignores this concept entirely. So while we, the players, might understand what is or isn't actual cyberpsychosis, the definition used by the average citizen of Night City is more akin to a blanket term about any chromed up gonk that starts doing some crazy shit. First being the most obvious from all the information I've told you, pre-existing mental illness and ongoing disassociation from humanity through Chrome installation. This is considered to be the true root of cyberpsychosis. Secondly, and thirdly, being rogue AI and general net running invasiveness, which happens to be one of the easiest to explain because we watched this happen with Songbird. As BlackWall rogue AI begin to manifest in her personality and physical being, along with pre-existing issues of course, she begins to lash out at everything around her, to the point that the voices of the BlackWall entirely take over her thoughts, leaving her helpless to fight back and to even beg for her death. Let's not forget that MaxTac gets called after her as well. So again, per Pondsmith's claims, rogue AI don't cause actual cyberpsychosis. But from an outside perspective, if a person was taken over by rogue AI and started attacking everything in sight, it certainly would seem that way. Same for quick hacks and net running. When V uses the quick hack cyberpsychosis, it's not invoking actual cyberpsychosis but a false illusion of it. Following this idea, it wouldn't be far-fetched to claim that netrunners who spend too much time in the net can become disillusioned with reality or even begin getting their synapses fried from cyber attacks, all of which can lead to violent outbursts. In the Bloody Ritual cyberpsycho sighting, Maelstrom cultists are attempting to summon Lilith from beyond. Now, the ritual itself is a bit misleading, as they are actually trying to bring a rogue AI from beyond the Black Wall into reality through a vessel. So it's all technical, not supernatural, but it provides a tangible occurrence to rogue AI or the net, sparking a bout of what appears to be cyberpsychosis. You can find a couple shards around the location that even claim this ritual is effectively hard resetting the subject and reformatting their brain to contain the new program. Sounds like Arasaka needs to hire Maelstrom. And lastly is corporate sabotage. Now this bit would seem more like a conspiracy if it weren't for how publicly known it is that corporations would gladly sacrifice the average consumer for their own benefit. This is perfectly encapsulated in Operation Carpe Noctem, a data shard that can be decrypted by V during the full disclosure side job. It reads, for Night Corp internal use only. The tests have come back successful. The artificial intelligence CN07 has proven itself capable of bypassing commercial, device-specific, and macro security systems accessible to Night Corp employees of the lowest ranks. None of the test subjects were aware that this experiment was being conducted on them. In compliance with the orders it was given, CN07 focused mostly on subject HK13, which at the time of the experiment's commencement was classified as calm and empathetic. After a period of subliminal conditioning, as we predicted, HK13 began to display acute psychopathic behavior. The highlight was a dispute over coffee, during which HK13 strangled one of their colleagues, then jumped out the 16th floor window of the research facility. We will soon commence the next phase of the procedure and install CN07 onto the devices of the actual target. If that's not convincing enough, listen to this segment by Maximum Mike on Moral Rock Radio.
Alright, listen up people, I've got a public service announcement. It's about the scourge of our age, that chrome nightmare that you know as cyberpsychosis. It seems we can't go a day without some boosted lunatic tearing through a crowd of bystanders. The story you've always heard is that it's a psychological condition, a kind of disassociative violence. But is there more to it? What if cyberpsychosis is intentional? I once heard a theory that I think merits some thought. An old friend of mine used to say that he thought the biggest manufacturers had got together a long time ago and agreed on a baseline failure rate for certain devices. Bad code, intentionally inserted into the mind-machine interfaces to slowly drive people up the wall, a kind of human planned obsolescence. They figure, what's the best defense against a nut job with a 23-inch telescoping blade in his forearm? A 26-inch telescoping blade in yours. I can't say he's not onto something. Every time some psycho tears his way through a mall, sales of combat cyberware spike. Every time Net54 News runs a story on a massacre, some Arasaka exec buys himself a new yacht. Can that be all, though? It's no secret that incidents of violent cyberpsychosis have skyrocketed in recent decades, despite improvements in manufacturing design. But there is something new in the latest generation cyberware. Get ready for this, kids. It's the BlackWall. You aren't a runner yourself, or a code jockey, you might not know, but the BlackWall isn't some mystical barrier floating somewhere in the deep net. It's actually a complex hardware-software infrastructure designed to keep AIs from accessing your gear, among other things. Maybe it doesn't work as well as NetWatch says. Maybe the madness of the deep net leaks over to our side from the BlackWall from time to time. Drives some poor chumbo right over the edge. And it's possible it doesn't really exist anyway. Maybe it's just something the media came up with. Look, I'm not saying there aren't attacks. I've seen a few myself. What I am saying is there's a million reasons why one human might want to butcher another. Hell, we've been doing it for millions of years, even without cyberware. But let me tell you, listeners, with cyberware, it's easier than ever. And on the other side, maybe the corporate and media types just came up with a word, so they wouldn't have to think too hard about it. And you wouldn't either. Of course, this is all speculation. If I knew what caused cyberpsychosis, believe me, I'd tell you.
So we've covered a lot in this video so far. In and out of universe definitions, cause and effect, shards, and more. But there's a key concept to cyberpsychosis that plays a role in some of our favorite characters and groups. This concept was explained best by Mike Pondsmith when asked why Adam Smasher wouldn't be considered a cyberpsycho. Didn't say he wasn't. There's a concept in psychology called high functioning. Adam is a high functioning cyberpsycho who happens to have a job where they want him to kill people. Perhaps MaxTac aren't cured, but rather reconditioned to be high-functioning cyberpsychos, in a field of work that satiates their urges similar to Smashers. Maybe the same could even be said for gangs like Maelstrom, though less favorably in the eye of the law. So earlier I mentioned that Johnny Silverhand is indeed a cyberpsycho. Let's discuss that, because he's clearly high-functioning as well. Well, players of the TTRPG were actually introduced to this from essentially the beginning in the Never Fade Away adventure. Listen to this excerpt from when Silverhand discovers Alt's almost lifeless body during the 2013 Arasaka raid. Silverhand stands away from the couch. Cut transmission, he says to Thompson. The green cyber optic goes dark. Silverhand's own eyes are featureless white marbles. The hand convulses in fury by his side, locking the HK in its low-slung hip rig. The metal fingers lock to the butt, Scrabble clicking along the Parkerized grip. He just doesn't care anymore. He's dead inside. Silverhand raises the gun. A red pinpoint centers on Toshiro's head. Bang, says Johnny. The hand convulses. Bang, says the gun. This is what Pondsmith had to say when asked about the hand. Yes, took 20 years, but you guys finally figured out that the hand is Johnny's cyberpsycho expression. Internally, Johnny treats any horrible thing he does as the hand took over. But why does Silverhand have cyberpsychosis? Well, there's actually plenty of reasons behind it. One such being a cause we previously haven't spoken about. Firstly is his pre-exist symptoms from being abandoned at a young age.
Never Fade Away only gave you a narrow picture of what he was like. Is that Johnny's a very cold son of a bitch. And that was, the way I always saw him was, this is one seriously damaged person. I mean, I actually have a story around, I've been building kind of the history of Johnny Silverhand. And, it starts off with the opening scene of his dad selling him at the age of 4 for basically a pack of cigarettes. And that's the good stuff, and how he ends up basically eventually ending up with, a nomad group that takes him in. And that in itself is an episode of interesting violence. So yeah, Johnny is messed up.
Being a veteran of the Second Central American War, where he lost his hand, his arm, and a close friend, experiencing hardship upon his return to the USA as a military deserter, substance abuse, and of course, installing cyberware like his infamous silver arm, a Sandevistan boost, optics, and nanosurgeons. Yeah, that's a lot, but there's one more thing. His Malorian Arms 3516 pistol. Wait, what? Well, it was a one-of-a-kind creation, specifically for the Rocker Boy, equipped with a prototype smart link and left-handed to be sported with his arm, packing a shot so powerful his fleshy right arm wouldn't even be able to handle it anyway. But it wasn't its firepower that created a problem, it was the smart link. Even just using Silverhand's Malorian can technically invoke a sense of cyberpsychosis, as the smart link overrides your body to create better precision while shooting, removing the sense of guilt and hesitation someone with empathy might usually feel when killing another living being. Paired with Silverhand's PTSD, personality, and troubled past, his arm would begin taking a mind of its own. But knowing Silverhand was a cyberpsycho poses a separate question. Why doesn't V get cyberpsychosis? I mean, the gonk lives in their head, and V even uses Johnny's Malorian. Well, the community's interest was summarized yet refuted so well by Reddit user GyroPyro32 that Mike Pondsmith actually responded, actually with a rather fleshed out explanation of cyberpsychosis, which he claims only partially explains it, as he could probably write a complete college thesis on this topic. He has an interesting excerpt on V though. He states, V is a different case. We don't know V's background. But even if V was full on corpo, they were able to hold it together even when they ended up with a dead rocker boy in their heads. Yeah, tell me about it. Johnny Silverhand's been in my head for the last 3 decades. In fact, having Johnny in their head probably helped V, because Silverhand's rage and attitude probably acted as a buffer for the psychological hits V is taking. It's like having a timeshare with a guy who's already half cyberpsycho and doesn't mind if V slaps stuff on their shared body. He's already crazy and violent. So, in summary, the reason V doesn't experience cyberpsychosis is at least in part thanks to Silverhand, taking the majority of the psychological hit due to being 2 people in a single body. Some things can likely be attributed to the relic as well, seeing as it's constantly rewriting V's brain. But I do want to say something a little controversial. The Edgerunner perk feels like a very obvious nod to early onset cyberpsychosis. Yeah, sure, it's not a full-blown cyberpsychotic break or empathy system, but it's definitely symptoms of low empathy. You're literally going into a fury mode with maniacal laughing in your head. Sorry, not sorry, devs. You'll never be able to convince me otherwise. Mike Pondsmith started the Cyberpunk universe with the 1988 release Cyberpunk Play, character roles, and of course, lore pertaining to Night City and the surrounding world. From there, it would continue to expand with supplements like Solo of Fortune, and full releases such as Cyberpunk 2020, all of which led up to the inception and creation of Cyberpunk 2077 in collaboration with CD Projekt Red. Yet surprisingly, one of the most contested topics I've seen both in my comments and on media like Reddit or Twitter is if the sourcebooks are canon to 2077. Now, a huge source of its misconception is simply the fact that Silverhand's memories are unreliable and show a different version of events than what actually happened. This is a very convoluted, yet explainable topic I already have videos on, so I'll just toss some comments by Mike Pondsmith up on screen that prove his memory isn't reality, so 2077 can't be considered an alternate timeline because of them. Hell, here's a clip from 2077 saying so.
Old Cunningham you strove to save in Arasaka Tower no longer exists. This should be obvious to you, as you were responsible for her death.
Your death wasn't Johnny's fault.
How could you know?
Seeing you in his memories, it was an accident.
What you saw was his subjective view of what happened. A warped account of events he locked away in his subconscious and replayed time and again. It bears no resemblance to the truth.
But I think I finally found the second source of the issue.
Cyberpunk 2077 isn't only set 50 years after the source material, but it also takes place in a parallel timeline. This gave the team the freedom to create a game that respected and referenced the source material, but also suited the shift to the video game medium.
That was a snippet from a YouTube video titled Making of Cyberpunk 2077 Behind the Scenes Documentary. This video obviously makes the claim that 2077 is a parallel timeline and has 1.3 million views. Just to cover some ground, I have a few interpretations of this clip. Firstly, it could just be a poor interpretation of something the developer said, something lost in the game of telephone, or even just poor wording. Secondly, let's make the assumption we can take this clip at face value, that Cyberpunk 2077 really was meant to be claimed as a parallel timeline. My interpretation would be based on other evidence I will be showing. Visualize two parallel lines because I suck at editing. These represent the timeline of 2077. Now, everything leading up to 2077 is identical, but once the timeline hits the beginning of the game, one timeline branches off. This branching would be explainable by one key element of the title. Cyberpunk is a role-playing game with alternative playthroughs and endings. The majority of playthroughs will not match what might end up being considered the canon events for the TTRPG moving forward. So for that sole purpose, it can't be claimed that your 2077 is canon to the TTRPGs, but it can be claimed that the TTRPGs are canon to 2077. I hope that makes sense. I'm genuinely trying to put that in the best way possible. If there's any shadow of the doubt left in your mind, Mike Pondsmith has this to say. There's still an incorrect interview floating around the interwebs that states that Cyberpunk 2077 and Cyberpunk 2020 are separate timelines. To clear this up, I am posting right here and now that the timeline is unified, with the path moving from Cyberpunk 2013 through 2020, then through Red, and up to 2077. Lord knows we spent enough time hashing the details out over the past 6 months. Expect more on this later. Back to your cyber lives, everyone. So, there you have it, chooms. Following up the premise of source material, many would also be led to believe that retconned or alternate universe material has no narrative connection to canon. And while 9 times out of 10 that's a safe bet to make, it's simply not the case for the Cyberpunk universe. And we have one specific book to thank especially for this, CyberGeneration. Released in 1993, the story centered around teenagers with unusual superhuman skills gained from a nanotech virus, which would be known as the Carbon Plague, an event that was recycled into Cyberpunk Red, but contained rather than having the opportunity to spread. This sourcebook definitely became a standout in large part to its tone and theme. Corporations had now become the new world governments. Players took on the role of youngsters, and heroic motives seemed to strangle the previous saying, "Cyberpunk isn't about saving humanity." It's about saving yourself, a theme of cyberpunk that is core to the setting. Much of what makes cyberpunk is the grim reality you find yourself in, one that isn't forgiving to those who try to make some big name for themselves. A would-be legend that oversteps at the wrong moment has their name erased from existence. It's certainly no fantasy land. So the superhero fiction prevalent in the story completely shifts its core. But that's not to say CyberGeneration doesn't still share a lot of its DNA with the canon timeline. You see, while this book branches from the outbreak of the Carbon Plague and thereby differentiates itself from the main timeline, it's actually crammed with information that's pre-Carbon Plague that many hold to be canon today, and hasn't ever really been contradicted or stated otherwise. Legends like Morgan Blackhand and Rache Bartmoss have their stories expanded beyond much of what we've seen in core books. Then there's Alt Cunningham. Her story being the most interesting of the bunch, as it not only establishes a background, but her future beyond 2013, much of which is yet to be contradicted to this day, and is, if anything, supported. A story of her desperate attempt to return to the real world in a cloned body after being accidentally trapped in the net by Silverhand during the 2013 raid. Though she learns a harsh truth, she can only copy-paste herself into a new body. The original self remains in the net, allowing two alts to live at once. So goes her operating both within and outside the net with the help of hired staff and herself. In this timeline, Silverhand is critically injured in an assassination attempt by Biotechnica, and Alt retrieves his body to soul kill and clone. But in this process, stores the original Johnny for safekeeping, leaving a clone of himself to roam instead. It is only once we read the canon Black Dog story in Cyberpunk Red that you can start piecing together the details. An adventure in which a group of mercenaries transport the dead but preserved Silverhand with his engram stored within to a woman named Angel. That's right, long story, but Arasaka wasn't in possession of Silverhand's body post-nuke. It was only later, closer to the 2070s, that they got it. Angel was a woman who bears a stunning resemblance to Alt Cunningham, the name Angel being a likely reference to a named chapter in Never Fade Away, Angel Heaven. There's a lot more to this story and the connections between canon and non-canon material, but this should get you thinking about just what happened with Silverhand between 2023 and 2077. I'll have some videos linked below to help you along further, but the point is, alternate timelines matter. Adam Smasher isn't a cyber psycho. Wait, what? Yeah, a lot of you are probably confused by that statement. Well, that's because it isn't true. And yet again, is the second most common comment I receive on any video involving Smasher or Cyberpsychosis. This idea stems from a misunderstanding about exactly what Smasher is and how it correlates to the concept of cyberpsychosis. Adam Smasher is a towering cyborg with little to no humanity left. In fact, his empathy stat is completely empty. There isn't even a 0. It's just non-applicable. The typical working definition people have about cyberpsychosis is that the cyberware itself makes you lose control and go off the deep end, thereby making the victim commit atrocious acts they otherwise wouldn't. But then you look at Adam Smasher, who is completely in control and lucid about his destruction, and there's no way it's reasonable to assume he's a cyberpsycho, right? Well, that's wrong. This misconception really is more about cyberpsychosis itself rather than a misconception about Smasher. Let me explain. Cyberpsychos are typically people already afflicted with existing psychopathic tendencies. The cybernetics they install only go on to enable and enhance these pre-existing conditions. This mixture of circumstances accelerate or exaggerate the outcome, as a result of pushing people to lose their sense of identity with every piece of themselves replaced by Chrome. It's why someone like David Martinez, who had a relatively healthy upbringing, was so resistant to the effects of cyberware, while a veteran and rebel like Johnny Silverhand could succumb to it quickly. Wait, what? Silverhand's a cyberpsycho now? Yes, he is. In a Reddit post, this is what Pondsmith had to say about it. Yes, took 20 years, but you guys finally figured out the hand is Johnny's cyberpsycho expression. Internally, Johnny treats any horrible thing he does as the hand took over. End quote. I think this is funny for the sole reason players of the original TTRPG definitely called this, but the lack of internet discussion just never gave way to it being talked about. Anyway, you're probably surprised by how well put together Johnny is despite being a cyber psycho. He certainly wasn't acting like Maine, David, or any of the enemies we encounter in 2077. Well, this actually plays into another concept that connects to Smasher. A user actually asked Pondsmith why Adam Smasher wouldn't be considered a cyber psycho, to which Pondsmith replied, "Didn't say he wasn't. There's a concept in psychology called high functioning. Adam is a high functioning cyber psycho who happens to have a job where they want him to kill people." End quote. So yeah, cyberpsychosis is way more complicated of a topic than it might initially appear, which is why I'm working on a video going in depth on the subject, so you chums will see that sometime soon. For anyone who's played the Firestorm Shockwave adventure or listened to Max Mike's Moral Rock show, this is going to be a familiar subject. Yorinobu Arasaka is a clone.
Now, I'm sure you've seen the news. Yorinobu Arasaka is the new head of Arasaka Corporation. Yeah, I'm afraid that's not possible. The truth is, Yorinobu's as dead as a runner surfing the BlackWall, and he's been for the past 50 years. So I guess we should start beginning, right, people? Yorinobu, as a lot of you know, is the youngest son of Old Man Saburo, but he didn't take after his father, quite the contrary. Now, when Yorinobu learned what his father's enterprise really stood for, he left. Kid ran away from home, formed a biker gang called the Steel Dragons. They weren't just any street gang, mind you. They had a mission. Espionage, terrorism, assassinations, all aimed at the Arasaka Zaibatsu. And they kept it up for years, too. But it all stopped on the day those towers in Corpo Plaza came down now. That's quite a coincidence, don't you think? The official story is that after the death of his big brother, Yorinobu came home, apologized to Big Daddy Saburo, and was accepted back into the family. That's a straight-up con, people. Yorinobu was in those towers when they got wiped off the map. Maybe even helped bring them down. And all the evidence is buried under 1 million tons of debris. We don't know. So who's this guy, you ask? The one on TV talking about his dear old dad and the virtues of the Arasaka family business? Yeah, I've got a few guesses. It's no secret Arasaka's been working on human cloning tech for almost a century now. So it's possible this guy is some sort of mind control clone of the original Yorinobu. Wouldn't that be just like old Saburo? Your kid doesn't turn out the way you want, so you just try again. Alternately, never figured out what happened to Kei, Yorinobu's older brother, after the war. Maybe he disappeared to a black clinic and he came out looking just like his younger brother, but without the stain of the fourth corporate weighing him down with bad PR. What do you think?
During the Firestorm Shockwave adventure, while inside the Arasaka HQ, player characters can discover a room next to the Soul Killer storage core with a large monitor displaying a slightly surreal version of Yorinobu, with even the data file being named Arasaka Yorinobu 9/24/2022. Attached to this room is what appears to be a cloning facility where a neural uploading system is hooked into the storage core, equipment that had definitely been used, and tissue samples labeled all Cunningham and Yorinobu Arasaka can be found. So it's a done deal, right? Yorinobu in 2077 is a clone. But it isn't true. This is actually a piece of information I got tripped up on, and thereby fell for. I actually made a whole video about the topic, discussing Max Mike, cloning technology, and finally the grand reveal in Firestorm Shockwave, all before realizing I made an easy yet grave mistake. I missed a single sentence in Cyberpunk Red that disproved the entire theory. That's right, a single sentence. Thought to have been soul killed by his elder brother Kei, it turned out that the person who ended up under the probes was a body double. Yorinobu made sure that during the war, he was impossible to find. End quote, page 268 of Cyberpunk Red. Poser gangs who look like Elvis, corporate doubles, FIA faceplates. I'm just going to start calling everyone in Cyberpunk a body double at this point. Saburo, body double. Kurt Hansen, body double. All Cunningham, body double. Jackie Wells, body double. Well, speaking of Jackie, he can't be saved. Not even by the relic. This ultimately comes down to two key points about Jackie's death. First, how and where the damage occurred. Jackie was shot in the gut by Arasaka security. Security that one can only assume aren't using nearly as kind of weaponry as Dexter Deshawn, who used a small caliber round when killing V. Second, being what specifically caused his death: excessive loss of blood. The nanites required to save V's life weren't programmed in such a way to interact with the rest of the body. Though let's say they were, and managed to activate pre-death and make their way to his torso to repair it. Even if they had stitched him up, by the time they would have, he had lost too much blood for it to matter. So unless the relic has an invisible blood bag connected to an invisible IV pole, Jackie was bound to die. So yes, if Jackie had the relic slotted at his time of death, he would have remained dead. Then the story would continue like it was fated to anyway. Or maybe he would have been revived, went to meet Dex with V, then got shot and dumped again anyway. The old net is a dangerous place to say the least. It's home to countless evolved rogue AI beyond human comprehension, many of which sprouted from military-grade artificial intelligence, leaving an ingrained sense of bloodlust for everything they can reach. So with the IG protocol net being so valuable in the world of cyberpunk, yet a huge portion of it risking the extinction of humanity, many fans ask one question: why not just destroy the physical remnants of the old net and reset? Well, chooms, what a loaded question, and to be honest, much easier said than done. At least from my technical understanding of the net and its function in 2077. But for the sake of avoiding overcomplications, I'm going to create one hypothetical. Let's say there was a way for humanity to disable the remnants of hardware that run the old net hidden in various abandoned bunkers or orbital facilities, whether it be using tech to access hard to reach places, setting off EMPs, or whatever you can think of. You must also ask, who would be willing to spend the money to do this? And why would they want to? Well, no one wants to, chooms. At least no one with the resources to do it. There is a reason that despite the ban and risks of diving across a black wall, major corporations and governments remain doing so. Whether it be Militech with Cynosure, Arasaka with Child Netrunners, or the NUSA with Songbird. The abandoned data left behind in the old net and the allure of controlling world-ending rogue AI is just too valuable. Why would any organization in the cyberpunk universe elect to give up their chance at an end-all, be-all trump card? So here, the old net remains. It is only once the threat reaches a critical point that these groups would even consider permanently destroying the old net. Now, if you're interested in learning more about this topic, I've also released a video extensively covering the logistics of how the net functions and difficulties in destroying it, so please go give it a watch if you haven't already. The functions of the Sandevistan and Kolesnikov are highly misunderstood in the fanbase, most of which can be attributed to how it's portrayed in Edgerunners and obviously 2077. It's understandable though. If you're just casually watching or playing, it can only really look like one thing: time manipulation. The ability to slow time around you for everyone and everything but yourself, and others with a Sandevistan or Kolesnikov. But that's actually not true, which shouldn't come as too much of a surprise if you're familiar with the setting and just how detrimental a power like that would be. If a corporation really had the ability to alter the fabric of reality like that, there'd be a single entity at the top and everyone else would be bottom feeders. Luckily for everyone in the cyberpunk universe, it doesn't work like that. The Sandevistan, also known as Speedware, and the Kolesnikov are called Neuralware Cyberware. Yeah, a lot of wares. It's wearing me out. Neuralware essentially uses nanotechnology to thread tiny linkages through the central nervous system, allowing systems like Speedware to route signals to the nervous system and increase existing abilities. In lore, Sandevistans are activated with a sub-vocalized mental command word, which then sends signals to the user's nerves to have superhuman awareness, reaction time, and reflexes. While this alone is helpful, Technology improvements are what made this so confusing, as by 2077, the implant is also capable of sending these signals to the muscles to increase their output, thereby overclocking the body to match the speed of the user's new reflexes that dilates their perception of time. So this is why they seem to be moving normally in slow time. It's really just making them a superhuman in that split moment, which is also why it's so damaging to the user. Your body isn't meant to be moving at such an insane speed, nor is your nervous system meant to be rapid firing so much information that it slows time. The Kolesnikov for the most part works the same, the biggest difference being that it's always activated, allowing the user to always be reacting with a higher than normal reaction speed. But it comes at a cost. The user must learn to readjust his or her actions to a world that appears to be moving in slow motion. Some versions of the Flash have the same consequence. As you can imagine, this is extremely damaging to the humanity of the user. Now, this specific piece was changed in 2077 for obvious reasons. Actually playing in slow motion at all times would be relatively unenjoyable, so you can instead think of it as an automatic Sandy by the time of 2077. And here's a few rapid fire corrections. There was actually 2 Arasaka towers in 2023, but that probably got retconned along with an aftershock story because of 9/11. That's right, read Mike Pondsmith's quote on screen. Militech was also always behind the raid. Silverhand was just a lead of a crew meant to be decoys, not to their knowledge though. The Night City legend, Morgan Blackhand, survived the AHQ incident. The data crash wasn't actually meant to destroy the net. It had parameters to target only corporations and make the net a free landscape. But the Rabbids virus got out of hand and started maliciously attacking everything in sight. David Martinez wasn't soul killed. The ending transition was him getting his head blown off, after Smasher surprisingly respected his final words and wasn't interested in being a construct. Arasaka didn't trap all in the net. It was Silverhand who prematurely disconnected her body before her construct could return to it in 2013. Probably the saddest accident in all of Cyberpunk's story, not to mention it being extremely impactful to the future of the timeline. Body horror as a subgenre focuses on the disturbed, unnatural, and even grotesque transformations of the human body, targeting the viewer's deep-seated fears in correlation to physical vulnerability, the integrity of one's body, and the anxiety of losing control over it. Some of the best examples being that of The Fly, in which a scientist gradually transformed to that of a more insect-like appearance and behavior, and The Thing, a sci-fi film by John Carpenter that follows a crew in their desperate attempt to defend against a creature capable of disguising itself as human. Now take a futuristic setting and cyberware, mix it with this unsettling psychological torment, and you've got several outputs in the 2077 universe. Whether it be the gruesome Ripper docs putting dangerous military implants onto the bodies of 17-year-olds, or cyberpsychos like Leon Rinder, who sold his entire body to rid himself of his guilt, body horror is extremely prominent. Not to mention the endless creepy implants like tentacle arms, bug eyes, mandibles, and other body conversions. Yet the quest that utilizes this concept at its best is one disguised in the busy Northside marketplace of Cargo Bay. A quest that doesn't focus on grotesque cyberware to make its statement. Sacrum Profanum is an impactful side job in an unassuming location, all beginning when you come across a chromed out monk in genuine distress, discovering that he isn't just a part of some subsect of monks with different beliefs. Rather, him and his brother were taken captive by Maelstrom and forced to have cyberware installed.
Fine, I'll help. But just so you know, things might get ugly. Maelstrom doesn't mess around.
There must be some other way. Help us, please, but without any bloodshed. I beg you.
I'll see what I can do. Either way, your brother's getting out.
I do not know how to thank you. They're keeping him in a shop just north of here. You shall find it next to the road along the docks.
Directly behind the monk, you'll find a shard that offers an interesting perspective on Buddhism and cyberware. that followers are not necessarily against implants, but rather abstain in order to achieve enlightenment. That drawing the line between self and worldly possession is important and not always so easy to differentiate. That cyberpsychosis is evidence of this inner turmoil. All of this only works to worsen the sick behavior of Maelstrom.
It's over now. I'm not with them.
So, what are you doing here? What happened?
Was walking by, caught some lame jokes about metal monks. Thing about Maelstrom, they're never just joking. Nah, the truth, your brother sent me. He didn't want the same thing to happen to you.
From the bottom of my soul, thank you. I'm especially grateful nobody was killed. May you continue on the path of peace. What compels these monsters is of no consequence. It is not up to us to judge what they deserve.
Yeah, sure. Your brother's waiting for you. Not far from here.
First I must catch my breath, and then I shall go. It is him who shall need saving now.
In Cyberpunk 2077, we typically expect danger in the form of guns and cyberware. But there's a side job that dives deeper beyond meaningless violence, beyond Chrome, into something much more disturbing, aptly titled The Hunt. Shortly after their work for Elizabeth Perales, word of V's legendary detective work begins to spread, up until it reaches the ear of a man named River Ward, who goes on to contact V with a new gig, one with a trail of blood, following a man named Anthony Harris, aptly named the Peter Pan serial killer, for his pattern of luring away young boys. But what makes this all the more disturbing is the fact that Anthony Harris has already been caught. Despite the fact he lays in a deep comatose following his confrontation with the NCPD, he remains a threat. It's not a race to prevent what he will do, but to prevent the consequences of what he has already done. V and River race against a clock they're not even sure of, reverse engineering easily missed details and analyzing brain dances to track down River's missing nephew, Randy, all while unraveling the disturbing psyche and practices of Harris. His victims would all be funneled in an attempt to recover from their drug addictions through a website called Drugs Are Bad. Further investigation leads to a website called Tony's Shelter, an empty promise of rehabilitation to all of the desperate people searching. Here, Anthony's perspective of his victims is revealed, a relation akin to that of a farmer and his cattle, livestock to either be nurtured under his control or put down, all of which is done through disturbing incubators that dump HGH and steroids into his sedated victims. Through the reliving of brain dances, V experiences the source of Anthony's fractured psyche, trauma inflicted by an abusive household.
Yeah, Dad?
You forget something? I asked you a question!
I don't know.
Choline and methionine levels. See anything odd?
Too low?
You were supposed to check before school. What do you gotta say for yourself? Cow's gonna die because of you. Gotta kill it like you killed your mama.
I'm sorry.
Don't apologize, just dial up her hormones.
And from others around him, such as a teacher who torments Anthony about the suicide of his father and his behavioral issues.
What's the matter with you, Anthony? I have to report this. I hope you understand that. This isn't normal behavior. Anthony, you killed Liam's turtle.
He was sick. He wouldn't eat, stayed in his shell. I just wanted to help him.
By injecting him with HGH? What were you thinking? Is this something your father taught you?
Fuck you.
What did you just say? Okay, I've had enough. Principal's gonna hear about this. Your foster parents, too. I see. Like father, like son.
Don't you dare talk about my dad!
That's right, you little shit. I know it all. Farm failed. Dad put a bullet in his head.
Shut up! Shut up! Shut up! You can't talk about my dad, you prick! You can't! You can't! He was sick, weak. I just wanted to help him.
All of which leads to the final brain dance, a first-person perspective of Harris calmly pursuing one of his escaped victims, one paralyzed from the waist down as a result of all the hormones and drugs circulating within their body, trapped in their own body, and an inescapable nightmare.
And where are you up to, Mike? Come here, you rascal. You'll hurt yourself. Tony'll take good care of you. Easy now.
Unfortunately for the residents of Night City, and of course the rest of the cyberpunk world, serial killers don't happen to be uncommon. This fact remains even in the 2020s, and one of the first serial killers introduced to players at the time was a man named Joshua Brightman, also known as the Night City Stalker, a name that would be difficult to merit in such a violent location. He's a man armed to the teeth, and then some more, and had committed numerous murders weekly. Before his initial visit to prison, he was a tech freak, following the development of cyberware with a calculating intensity, going all out on cyberware purchases such as body plating, cyber limbs, and nearly every legal and illegal piece of cybertech you could think of. But the most disturbing fact about Brightman is he wouldn't want you blaming his cold, malicious intent on cyberpsychosis. No, that was a cop-out. He takes pride in the fact he was a psycho long before cyberware was made available. So naturally, he has the behavior of a calculated, Hannibal-like killer. He's naturally stealthy and delights in scaring his victims before he kills them. During a ritual conducted by members of Maelstrom, an alleged entity named Lilith was summoned from beyond the Black Wall and took over the body of one of their members, causing the Maelstrom member to develop a form of cyberpsychosis, or at least, that is the claim. You find her in a ritualistic circle, surrounded by bodies and, naturally, blood. She awakens from an ice-cold bath and an implied connection to the net, an obvious necessity for contacting a rogue AI. But what we don't really get answered is if it has actually entered the cyberpsycho and voluntarily attacked us, or if the connection of the Black Wall simply induced cyberpsychosis. Not to mention that V and the player have no idea who Lilith is. Is she just some rogue AI Maelstrom is aware of? Is she a complete fabrication? Or is she even a powerful entity like All Cunningham? There are, however, a lot of assumptions to be made piecing together what little evidence we have. A puzzle that would take a full video to even attempt, as the general consensus in the community is that mysteries like Gary the Prophet, Mr. Blue Eyes, Night Corp, Lilith, and All Cunningham are ultimately connected. It is unknown if we will ever get concrete answers. So, body horror confronts us with the fear of losing control over our physical form, but some philosophers or spiritualists would say we are missing another piece of the puzzle that's equally important, especially for the cyberpunk genre, and that is the possibility of losing control over the self, our identity, consciousness, embodiment, and what many would call our soul. The presence of the net and its data structure introduces horrors beyond our imagination, and that includes the process known as digital immortality, a result of the program called Soulkiller. Now, the original creator of Soulkiller, All Cunningham, and those like Arasaka after her, would lead you to believe this process records, replicates, or even reanimates oneself, ultimately saving them. This couldn't be further from the truth. Originally, unbeknownst to All Cunningham, this process doesn't just transfer the individual. It more often than not eradicates the original and replaces them. An understanding Cunningham came to accept when she attempted to escape the net to a newly cloned body, only to have a clone of herself be placed within it. The same occurred when V was soul killed at the end of 2077.
I am currently verifying the checksum and eliminating engram copy errors in the process.
Wait, you mean am I a construct?
This program and information raises eerie questions about the nature of the soul, identity, and consciousness. If a person's thoughts, memories, and even emotions are copied, does that copy still hold the essence of who they are? Are they truly that person? Or is it just a hollow imitation, a flickering ghost of memory and code? Digital immortality might offer a second chance at life, but it isn't for you. The net of the early 2000s wasn't safe by any means, but to compare it to what it transformed into, now known as the old net, would be laughable. This era fostered a great number of talented netrunners. Legends like Alt Cunningham, Spider Murphy, and Rache Bartmoss had all helped to shape it into what it was. They even put out some of the most powerful programs to realm it. During this time, that was as dangerous as it got. It was up to netrunners to outperform each other and to stay alive. But Rache Bartmoss, well, that guy changed the status quo. He initiated the data crash, releasing his Rabbids virus out into the original net upon his death. The purpose? To breach all corporate data fortresses and unleash their data onto the net for all to access, thereby collapsing the hierarchy as it was known. But he failed to place the necessary parameters on his virus. It mutated and went out of control, violently attacking and infecting anything and everything. Netrunners, corporations, governments, it didn't discriminate. It had infected 78% of the net in a matter of months. But the scary part wasn't the economic collapse, data corruption, or even death. It was the countless military-grade AI that were unshackled and mutated into extremely dangerous entities that would go on to mix into the endless droves of Rabbids that spread across the net. It was these unstoppable powers that forced Netwatch to collaborate with Alt Cunningham to construct the Black Wall, a potent AI with the sole task of blocking off sections of the net that had been overrun by rogue AI. But really, it was just a band-aid solution, a flimsy gate that is bound to fail. You see, locking these AI away, allowing them to evolve and become tomorrow's problem, might have been one of the worst possible methods of damage control. The AIs beyond the Black Wall are no longer beings bound by programming or logic. They've become alien in thought, reshaping themselves to exist in ways that defy the human mind's understanding. Much like eldritch beings from a Lovecraftian horror, these entities represent something unnatural, incomprehensible. They're neither good nor evil. They simply are, existing in ways beyond human comprehension, occupying a dimension of the digital world that's unfathomable and limitless in theory. But death by rogue AI would make you believe otherwise. Documents from the Cynosure project, backed by the No Coincidences novel, recount a painful, lonely, and terrifying death. Without neural network stabilizers, a netrunner's brain isn't capable of withstanding an encounter with a rogue AI. The sudden volume of data required to be processed in the form of an attack from the AI literally fries human synapses that are already preoccupied with the mere fact of being in cyberspace, resulting in the runner foaming at the mouth and bleeding from their eyes. No Coincidences takes this even further, detailing that the ravenous rogue AI will devour every bit of you, tearing limb by limb indiscriminately. In the cyberpunk genre, corporate power is absolute, with resources and influence that often surpass those of the world's greatest governments, more often than not, becoming said governing power. But while their promises of progress and prosperity lure people in, beneath the shiny logos and sleek glass towers lies a reality marked by exploitation, manipulation, and abuse. Humanity and morals are sacrificed for profit, where people and even nature itself are reduced to mere commodities. Now, I have gone on record stating Biotechnica is one of the best, most helpful corporations in 2077, but that is a pretty low bar. Yes, they do a lot of good, much more than others, but they're equally guilty of some of the most abusive corporate practices and inhumane experiments. The most notable of these being in relation to the Red Ochre Nomad clan. Biotechnica's regional director for tech and development, Dr. Joanne, aided by colleagues Alex and Diana, was responsible for the capture of nomads of the Red Ochre clan, using them as test subjects for a project called Nightingale, resulting in the death of 70 clan members. To prevent a leak of the affair, Dr. Joanne also ordered Biotechnica security to have her colleague Amelia Morton killed. Media Manuel Mendoza, who started investigating Project Nightingale, befell a similar fate. Despite her best efforts to offer the nomads hush money in return for their forgiveness, the clan wanted blood, and to get it, they reached out to the fixer of downtown Night City, who in turn put out a hit on Joanne, which the Solo V picked up to ensure the nomads' vengeance. Evidence of further experiments can be found in an extremely disturbing shard on Clement Street leading to Pacifica, in the Biotechnica flats. It's located on a dead body next to a tanker, and details an archived conversation between Ed Charlize Fury and Dakota Smith. Charlize is running with a crew that has just escaped a heist on Biotechnica in order to save several women who were artificially fertilized. Their vehicle had given out, and Fury is told that if worse comes to worse, ditch everyone and save at least one of the mothers. In the Nomad camp, we can even access a laptop that has the Biotechnica site pulled up. The news reads, scientists in Rome have successfully spliced human brain cells with wolf embryos. Ever since the majority of governments outlawed the destruction of hybrid embryos, there have been more and more efforts to create, end quote. Despite this, Saul Bright, leader of an Audicados clan outside of Night City, was negotiating with Biotechnica to have his clan work for them in exchange for reverse transpiration xerophytes, equipment to help his clan grow crops in the Badlands and thereby be more self-sufficient. Although Saul sought to enter his clan into a more permanent working relationship with Biotechnica in order to provide his people with a steady income, this notion was very unpopular among his followers, and thus never came to fruition. A city not spoken about enough in the context of cyberpunk is Chicago, though who could really blame you when its growth has purposely been stunted since the early 2000s, a victim of several world conflicts. After already being severely impacted by the collapse, the city was hit by a catastrophic bioplague in 2012 created by the federal government. Within a span of 6 months, the city of Chicago was devastated, with a death toll approaching 200,000. It's stated in the NeoTribes sourcebook that many residents stayed during the plague and survived. However, any groups such as nomad tribes exploring the area must be equipped and alert at all times due to the severe consequences of the plague on the natives, otherwise referred to as mutants, seen as neither sane, normal, or healthy, some living off animals, some off each other. They are the cause of innumerable fires and destruction in the area, and it is quite clear that they do not care. These deformations and influence on their psyche is so severe that while some have hope of rehabilitation, many believe it is kinder to put them out of their misery. Even by 2020 standards, they are deformed, deranged, and have little opportunity for a normal life. While not much else is known about the residents or state of Chicago, it's difficult to believe it has improved much by 2077. As Arasaka detonated virus bombs in the city during the Fourth Corporate War to prevent Militech from making it a stronghold. Cinderman is a very shocking side job in 2077 that you, as V, are incapable of preventing. No matter what, the outcome is the same. It follows the ticking lifespan of a man named Joshua Stephenson, a murderer who converted to Christianity during his time in jail, realizing all the harm he had committed in the past and looking to atone for it. And unfortunately for Joshua, in his vulnerable, damaged state of mind, a brain dance studio is more than happy to take advantage of him to make a provocative film. One that many protesters call blasphemous to no surprise, seeing as the premise of this BD is to reenact the crucifixion of Jesus Christ. And if V chooses to participate, they will be the one to drive every nail into Joshua and recite the Bible along him until he is dead. A wildly disturbing and mildly graphic series of events.
Do you not fear God? You stand condemned under the same sentence. We are punished justly, for we receive what our deeds deserve. But this man has done no wrong.
Truly, I say to you, today you will be with me in paradise.
Amen.
This Sinnerman questline, while disturbing, is unsurprisingly only scratching the surface of how horribly brain dances can be twisted to fulfill the sick perversions of shady, soulless clients. Illicit BD recordings, also called XBDs, feature gruesome and bizarre scenes, including violence, torture, and even murder. XBDs are created by small teams who kidnap unwilling victims. Some XBDs are recorded from the perspective of the torturer, while others are the perspective of the torturee, all of which are rarely edited, and reliving can cause nausea, epileptic seizures, or in extreme cases, even death. We got a glimpse into this process with David Martinez, as Kurosaki tortured him with number 32 of the Edgerunner's BD series, which featured the cyberpsycho Norris. But 2077 itself presents a much more disturbing XBD presence in the form of Disaster Piece and the Dirty Biz Gig. But to be completely honest, these topics are way too sensitive for this video, and better left alone for now. For the final segment of this video, I just want to point you all to perhaps check out the Interface Magazine Volume 2, Issue 2, and Night's Edge sourcebooks for Cyberpunk 2020. While they aren't canon, they're an interesting read and could help you come up with some crazy ideas if you want to run a tabletop game. The two supplements will introduce ideas like Lovecraftian horror, vampires, cults, werewolves, and much more. Yeah, while all of it won't necessarily fit the theme of Cyberpunk outright, there's ways to pull it off. I mean, there are werewolves running around in canon from Forlorn Hope, as well as vampires from Tales of the Red Street Stories. So perhaps the world of 2077 is a little crazier than you've been led to believe. The NUSA lied to V. He was never in a coma and didn't lose his combat implants through surgery. And no, I'm not just saying that because I need to huff copium after the new ending rolled credits. I say it because I believe there's a compelling story to be told otherwise. Utilizing the information found in the Cyberpunk sourcebooks, Phantom Liberty expansion, and more. The further we delve into the research of Project Cynosure, the Black Wall, the Neural Matrix, and the shady dealings of NUSA, it becomes clear to see that we can't trust what we are told at face value. So today, I'm going to pick apart Phantom Liberty's plot threads and present some new ideas you may have not thought of previously. If anything, you will leave this video with new perspectives and ideas about Cyberpunk 2077 to expand your own beliefs. The tower ending might not be as linear as you've been led to believe. To understand this theory, it only makes sense to begin with the technology that got us into this whole mess. Well, okay, not the relic, but the neural matrix. This tech was the sole objective of Songbird's, as it was ultimately meant to save her. She faced a similar situation to V, a dwindling lifespan that didn't have many options left, all a consequence of her being coerced to breach and utilize the BlackWall or the NUSA. The so-called firewall, which is actually its very own AI, meant to divide the infested old net from the new. This meant that every time she tampered with the BlackWall, she was not only facing damage inflicted by the wall, but the extremely dangerous rogue AI that continued to probe it. It had been established back in the 2020s just how much of a danger these rogue AI were, hence the IG protocol net being completely blocked off from public access and later having the BlackWall erected. When the Rabbids virus had been released by Rache Bartmoss, it had only meant to collapse the corporate data fortresses, thereby leaking all their data and crippling them all economically. It was meant to be a revolution, but it had backfired. With no Bartmoss to keep the Rabbids in line, they evolved far beyond their original parameters, beginning to corrupt anything and everything they could, including dangerous military-grade AI. All of this explanation is to help you understand the wasteland of the old net and just how dangerous these rogue AI are. Without any oversight, they've all evolved to almost beyond human comprehension. Yes, I said almost. You see, corporations weren't about to not only let all their corrupted data just be lost forever, but also allow these extremely dangerous AI go to waste. No, no, no. It's not enough to lock them behind a wall and let it be. These corporations want control of the AI. So, it began a BlackWall arms race. Arasaka's mission would be the one unveiled in Lucy's backstory during Edgerunners, while one of Militech's would take form as Project Cynosure. Project Cynosure would aim to capture rogue AI and use them as their very own weapons. This is how weapon blueprints such as the Erebus, SMG, and Kanto Cyberdeck came to be. But most importantly, the Neural Matrix. It housed a rogue AI advanced enough to presumably cure Songbird or even V. Using this neural matrix comes down to two of the ending choices in Phantom Liberty, first of which is to side with Songbird and send her to the moon. With the help of Mr. Blue Eyes, she is sent to the moon, where we later learn her treatment is a success, though the specifications we are unaware of. The second ending is to choose to ultimately side with Reed and hand Songbird over. This will bring her into NUSA custody and open up the tower ending for V. This surgery using the neural matrix doesn't entirely sway in V's benefit, as he wakes up 2 years later to a new world, one where relationships, friendships, and time have moved on. Not only does V have to face all this new change to the external world, but the internal as well. Upon awakening, Reed claims that V's neurons can no longer handle combat implants, essentially putting him back to square one of his new life. And what if this coma wasn't accidental? Rather, it was induced by the NUSA, for alternative reasons. A dialogue by Reed first brought me to this idea.
How'd you know? When I'd wake?
Doctor's estimates. You were supposed to be conscious by today. Tomorrow latest. They started bringing you up a few days ago. Controlled process.
After 2 years, the doctors had supposedly begun a wake-up process for V. My first thought was that he was actually in a coma, induced by the NUSA to assure silence from V for as long as it mattered. V obviously knew a lot, but it wouldn't be completely necessary to kill him in this situation. What he knew somewhat had an expiration date that would no longer matter as long as he was kept under watch and control long enough. But I started thinking past this. What if he was never in a coma? What if the NUSA themselves disabled his combat implants? Well, for you to have a clear picture of why I would come to these conclusions, we need to look at two people that exemplify just how and why the NUSA would do something like this. There's even a third later down the line that I will cover, alongside some interesting Cynosure case logs. First of which is the obvious example from Phantom Liberty, Songbird. During her time with the NUSA, she was turned into one of their most valuable assets. She was turned into a walking net running station capable of probing the Black Wall and utilizing its power, which is what had led to her chromed out body. Her access to the Black Wall was invaluable. It gave the NUSA an edge on the competition that was still trying to secretly use it. While we know that the fate of Songbird after being handed to the NUSA isn't pretty, it is heavily implied that she is no longer the person she once was, and is cut off from the rest of the world. So much so that even Reed can't get any information on her. In all likelihood, Myers opted to make her into more of a puppet, rather than cure her. The fate bestowed upon Songbird is to lose all her freedom and humanity, and turn purely into a connection to the Black Wall, to be abused over and over for this purpose.
I can't. Somi. You know I need that neural matrix.
Use it once I'm gone. It'll work. Just please.
I'm sorry, Sumi. But the FIA... they'll help if and only if I bring you in alive. That's the deal.
No, please. You're leaving me to a fate worse than death.
Somi!
Would it not make sense that when willing to do this to her, they would also do it to V, turning them into a weapon with the only purpose of following the NUSA's every command, a sort of Winter Soldier scenario where V becomes a mindless mercenary. Then once they've done what they needed, discard of them. Well, going this route rather than just trusting V outright makes a lot of sense when you look at the story of Morgan Blackhand, the #1 solo of his time, contracted by Militech for the majority of his career. It all came to a close when the nuke went off under him and Atom Smasher's feet during the 2023 Arasaka raid, leaving them to fall into the rubble and blast zone beneath them. Get this though, somehow Blackhand had managed to survive this incident. While his story remains largely unknown, besides a few teases by the creator Mike Pondsmith, he took this time to leave Militech behind, likely recognizing the risk of trusting any corp was no longer worth it, despite the luxurious lifestyle he got to live. Militech losing its top solo and leader from the 4th Corporate War would turn out to be a pretty heavy hit, leaving a void that really just couldn't be filled by anyone else. To make things worse, Atom Smasher went back to Arasaka and was left with no rivals to his strength. So if this is really true, just what information shows that the NUSA has the tech to do something like this? Well, they might have the tech to do this otherwise, but what I will be looking over is in relation to Project Cynosure and the consequences of probing the Black Wall. A detailed file can be found in the Cynosure facility from a Militech netrunner named Lisa Smith. It reads, "Something happened to me yesterday. After a deep dive into cyberspace, they whisk us away for the usual testing. At one point, we got to those weird neurological tests that I always thought were kind of funny, where they ask you questions that make no sense, but apparently reveal something about yourself. You're probably familiar with some of them. What does the sound of one hand clapping? What does a mouse running through a maze represent to you? What do you associate with the smell of freshly roasted coffee?" And it was at this moment I hesitated, because, well, I suddenly realized that I didn't know what coffee tasted like. I know what coffee is, but that's it. Strange, right? That feeling passed when I made myself a cup of strong coffee, but I have to admit I was a little weirded out. What else could I have potentially forgotten? Is it some kind of side effect of my last few dives? I doubt it, since I've been doing them for years. Anyway, hope you're doing well, Doc. Maybe the next time we meet, you might have an explanation." End quote. It seems to me that the possibility of controlling, tampering, and erasing memories are all viable when utilizing the BlackWall and its rogue AI. This of course includes the neural matrix. Now let's take a look back at 2079, or I guess look forward. When V visits Vic at his clinic, listen to what he has to say.
Well, your core looks fine. Good even. Let's take a look at your motor cortex.
Can't say I like that,
First time I've seen anything like this. Your cortex seems to have turned deaf to implant signals. Maybe reinstall the neural port firmware. No, that'd... Maybe switch to binary signaling. That's a risk of shock. Life-threatening kind.
Said you can do something, Vic.
I was wrong. I'm sorry.
The explanation seems to be entirely different from what Reed has proposed. While normally I chalk this up to layman's terms, Reed isn't some idiot. He'd be perfectly capable of understanding and relaying this type of information. While Reed makes it out to be neuron damage, that they had disabled his combat implants, Vic describes it as his motor cortex being deaf to implant signals. It's not just implants being disabled, it's any possible function being muted, something no one else would have the technology to fix. It's all of these little details that lead me to believe that the NUSA is definitely lying to V on just what is going on. The neural matrix was clearly used beyond its initial purpose to simply cure V. Though the specifics we may never actually know, which is what leads us to speculation like this, V's story is likely to be left in the air following 2077, more of a Morgan Blackhand type legend we hear in passing. I also want to touch upon just how valuable the relic technology is to a corp like Militech. Experimenting on V during this time, switching around his consciousness, attempting to replicate his situation, etc., would all help in their research to control the rogue AI beyond the Black Wall. While none of this is confirmed to be tied together, this information is extremely interesting. In the Cyberpunk 2077 No Coincidences novel, there is a character that is revealed to be a hybrid of an AI and human, a test subject that is meant to help bridge Militech's connection to the Black Wall. In theory, an AI that is indistinguishable from a human that would be able to help control the rogue AI in a way no other can. This character essentially had their memories erased and was turned into a sleeper agent to be tested by Militech. The test being to assassinate a high-value Arasaka target. The time in which this takes place is unclear, but is set sometime in 2077. So the big question is obviously, is it before, during, or after V's story? Well, it seems that this timeline doesn't entirely matter in this scenario. This character wasn't the first or last in this program, so after this information, I believe V was looped into this AI hybrid program because of their entanglement with the relic, becoming one of the best possible subjects Militech could get their hands on. 1990 marked the release of Cyberpunk 2020, R. Talzorian's follow-up to the popular 2013 edition. It followed an obvious 7-year time skip, retcons to accommodate the German reunification in 1990, and was overall meant to streamline and update its predecessor. The types of things you'd expect, such as updated rules for combat, net running, and character generation. This was the exciting part though. Cyberpunk 2020 was a major success and gained the IP a lot of traction. It went on to get a total of 28 supplements, sourcebooks, and adventures between 1993 and 1996. This is just including R. Talzorian's own publishings. Looking at Atlas Games, 2020 got another 12 adventures. While these weren't canon, I definitely wish some of the insane stories were. But backtracking to R. Talzorian, early on in their publications came a sourcebook to follow up Cyberpunk 2020 setting, one set in the year of 2027 that is now retconned from the timeline. An alternate world sourcebook by the name CyberGeneration. The first edition would even require the 2020 rulebook, as many others would. Released in 1993, the story centered around teenagers with unusual superhuman skills gained from a nanotech virus, which would be known as the Carbon Plague, an event that was recycled in a Cyberpunk Red, but was contained rather than having the opportunity to spread. This sourcebook definitely became a standout in large part to its tone and themes. Corporations had now become the new world governments. Players took on the role of youngsters, and heroic motives seemed to strangle the previous saying, Cyberpunk isn't about saving humanity, it's about saving yourself. A theme of Cyberpunk that is core to the setting. After all, much of what makes Cyberpunk is the grim reality you find yourself in. One that isn't forgiving to those who try to make some big name for themselves. A world where a would-be legend that oversteps at the wrong moment has their name erased from existence. It's certainly no fantasy land. So the superhero fiction prevalent in the story completely shifts its core. But that's not to say CyberGeneration doesn't still share a lot of its DNA with the canon timeline, which shows in the fact that Mike Pondsmith doesn't regret CyberGeneration in the way he does Cyberpunk v3, which we will be covering later in the video. A lot of this story is recycled in the canon timeline while providing us a unique opportunity to see more of the characters we love be expanded on ahead of Firestorm Stormfront and Shockwave, in a way that simply wouldn't be possible otherwise. Many of the details us fans consider canon about legends like Rache Bartmoss or Morgan Blackhand were established in CyberGeneration, which shouldn't feel so bad to say, seeing as it was never meant to alter the established timeline of 2020. So anything mentioned about a character that predates the year 2020, in theory, should still be canon material. Take for example the legendary solo Morgan Blackhand. It establishes him as a veteran, named his hometown, and shared the story behind his introduction to Militech, all of it leading up to his reputation and trademark appearance. Even the detailing of his transition to tactical operations and strategic threat management rings true in the Firestorm series. It is only once we've reached 2020 that things derail from the story we know. Well, let's not get ahead of ourselves. Should we really be ignoring this now defunct Cyberpunk entry? I would say, well, probably. If you don't want spoilers, that is. Even just drawing from yet again Blackhand's story, there are parallels that can be formed, despite what little we know about him after 2023 in canon. In CyberGeneration, Blackhand had resigned from Militech and began freelancing, eventually being approached by the ISA to run the new Agent Corps, one that would prioritize hunting down children affected by the Carbon Plague. Blackhand's personal code was pretty clear, so he refused the offer. In response, the ISA sent in a Spec Ops team to assassinate him. Of course, this didn't go as planned and went extremely south, ending with their second in command dead in their offices and a trail of bodies behind a Blackhand who was happy to prove his point. He went on to retire to an offshore fortress followed by loyal ex-Militech solos. This entire corporate betrayal and retirement heavily mirrors what we currently know in canon. Militech, in some way or another, had detonated the nuke prematurely under Blackhand's feet during the 2023 Arasaka assault. So according to Mike Pondsmith, Blackhand had pretty much taken the opportunity to go off the grid, leaving the corporate lifestyle behind and slimming down due to missing out on fancy corporate paid meals. An interesting comparison is even made to the movie Logan, so things seem to be clicking for the most part. But as we approach the end of Blackhand's character sheet, we are thrusted into the story of Old Cunningham and Johnny Silverhand in the year of 2027, one that seems to parallel a much larger conspiracy in the current canon. But until you start connecting the minor details and tabletop adventures of Red, the story between the two may appear alien at a glance. In this timeline, not much is left to mystery. Old Cunningham had been doomed to life as an AI after Johnny Silverhand unplugged her in his rescue attempt, with Silverhand depositing her now mindless husk safely in a cold sleep. Of course, not changing anything from the previous canon. While we never officially learn of what Silverhand did with her body that held a very faint pulse, we could assume he wouldn't have just given up and disposed of it. Back to CyberGeneration, Alt went on to steal $20 million from the Arasaka mainframe to plan an escape. Using these newly acquired funds, she set up a small, highly secret research corp through her now huge web of investment accounts. Over these 9 years, she directed her employees to study the most advanced techniques in cloning technologies, including stolen data on Biotechnica's failed cloning attempts in 2019, with an eye towards replicating her frozen body, which is all tried and true tech in current canon. By 2019, Alt had reversed the soul killer process with a new program. He instructed her employees to bring a cloned body to the lab and prepared the downloading process. But obviously, this being cyberpunk and all, it hadn't gone so smoothly. Instead of her AI conscious being transferred, she had actually transferred her basic personality into a clone. She had learned it was only possible to copy her neural net into the waiting brain. The original remained trapped. Hopeless of her return to reality, she let the second Alt Cunningham run free, while she went on to create Shangri-La for the hundreds of soul killer victims and other disembodied personalities transferred into the net, also known as the Ghost Hound, the very same concept we learn about in Cyberpunk Red in 2077. And here comes Johnny Silverhand, a rocker boy who, rather than fall victim to Atom Smasher during a raid on Arasaka Tower, falls victim to a Biotechnica-sponsored assassination, only to end up being met with an offer by Alt Cunningham's clone while trapped in a cryo tank with half his body gone, which, funnily enough, Silverhand seems to always lose half of his body, or guy. This was the offer, to upload his engram to the net via Soulkiller and download him into a suitable body. But there was a secret up Alt's sleeve. This wouldn't be the original Johnny. It was an unaware copy sent out to Rome while the original was data stored for safekeeping. That way, if he ever ended up being killed again, Alt 2 would be capable of farming copies of his engram and body to make more and more. Like I said, this all sounds like a fanfiction that has no attachment to 2077, but you'd be wrong. Cyberpunk Red's Black Dog adventure provides a good foundation for this entire story being in canon. In this adventure, a group of Edgerunners are tasked with transporting a mysterious crate from Night City to Los Alamos in New Mexico, their employer being a full Borg named Samantha Stevens. The prevalence of this detail lies in a cancelled story, an entire short story that happens at ground zero of the AHQ disaster, and how Samantha ended up with Johnny's body. It was completed and meant to be put in the also cancelled Aftershocks book. However, due to a certain attack in 2001, it was no longer appropriate to release it in the face of so much real-world death. So we instead received this adventure later down the line. While it is never explicitly confirmed it is Johnny's body within the crate, there are some convincing reasons as to why it would be. Beyond the fact it is Samantha Stevens behind the gig, she also has possession of Silverhand's unique Malorian and Porsche. Then there's the client receiving this crate, a woman and close friend of Samantha, by the name Angel, who bears a shocking resemblance to Alt Cunningham. She has possession of an unreleased samurai song and is taking refuge in a lab. To tie a ribbon on it all, this quote is straight from the text after the crew leaves. There's a hissing of compressed air, of utter cold that blows back her hair, as the casing splits to reveal the blue-white ice of the hidden cryo chamber. She tenderly looks down at the dark, frozen face behind its masking curtain of ice. "Hello, my love," she says. End quote. After all of this tied-in information between CyberGeneration, the cancelled Aftershock story, and Black Dog, I simply can't imagine Angel being anyone else. This is the version of events I've thought of pertaining to current canon. The events of a CyberGeneration story are obviously shifted to the time of Red rather than the 2020s to better fit the canon of the Fourth Corporate War, in which Angel gets possession of Silverhand's body, produces a clone for him as well, but also keeps his original engram in a database. So while these two are running around, or discovered, Arasaka manages to get their hands on the stored version of Silverhand's engram. All of this explaining why Relic Johnny was still stuck in cyberspace for 50 years, and why the Alt Cunningham we come across in cyberspace isn't similar to the one Johnny once knew. She had lost a portion of herself. So to wrap it all up, yeah, I think a lot of this story applies to current canon. Now that I've laid out the setting, lore, atmosphere, and suspiciously connected character stories, I think it makes sense to talk about the fan reception of this title. Well, I would say it shouldn't come as any surprise to you that it was well received by both critics and fans, so much so that it went on to get its own standalone edition in 1995. Two of the most notable reviews have this to say. The whole thing was written to be seriously non-linear, but a cleaner design might have helped organize things better for players who don't want to memorize the contents of the book, the type of players who will love CyberGeneration. A lot of people talk about systems that encourage roleplay over role-playing. CyberGeneration is one of the few games I've encountered that actually manages to do so, not by using a heavy-handed or pretentious approach, but by the very nature of the game environment." End quote. Even to this day, avid fans of Cyberpunk and CyberGeneration recommend it eagerly to any inquiring new fans. Despite being a shift in tone and atmosphere, arguably being a far more massive leap than it should have been coming from 2020, the game remains beloved by many, and it contains a lot of amazing ideas. Amazing ideas that seem to have been recycled to the core Cyberpunk timeline, despite being retconned to an alternate universe. You're probably feeling pretty damn good about now. CyberGeneration was a fairly amazing adaptation that provided me a platform to lore dump you with theories just now. It's spoken about lovingly by its creators and is even still in print and sale on their web store. Well, R. Talzorian went on to create the Firestorm, Stormfront, and Shockwave sourcebooks, detailing the Fourth Corporate War and ending in 2023, which were both popular and added only good things to the IP. So everyone was excited from the teased follow-up Firestorm Aftershock. But this long-awaited third volume, meant to tie up all the loose ends together and herald the end of the old Cyberpunk 2020 game world, would end up cancelled, later to be folded into the Cyberpunk v3 rules book. Keep in mind the one glaring fact as we dive into this edition. It was meant to be a core rulebook to act as the next Cyberpunk 2020 and be canon to the series going forward, so the fact it is now defunct, only had 2 source books published to accompany it, and is no longer in print despite being a decade younger than CyberGeneration, should paint a clear image in your head. Not to mention that Mike Pondsmith himself refuses to even think about it. V3 found itself in the era following the Fourth Corporate War and events of Firestorm. The data crash has resulted in the widespread corruption of the net and major losses of hard copy data to the point that all data is intangible and recent recorded history is in doubt. An example that pops up in Pondsmith's demos at conventions, releases on the internet, and in the finished game is that knowledge and recorded history has become lost or corrupted. Many people in the world now believe Richard Nixon, instead of resigning over Watergate, committed suicide on camera, and that memes such as the moon landing being a hoax became prevalent. The war has also led to the collapse of nations, the world economy, and many of the staple mega corporations. This civil upheaval leads to the rise of alternative cultures, which is where the setting ultimately falls apart. V3 couldn't decide what it wanted to be, and this was exemplified by splitting society into 6 alt cults, each latching onto a particular ideology. And let me just say, even after understanding what alt cults are, my mind always just jumps straight to Alt Cunningham cults, rather than alternative cults. Maybe I'm just slow, but I hope I'm not the only one. All of this, much like CyberGeneration, is a dramatic change in setting and style. With the introduction of alt cults and confusion behind the data crash, everything molded to become an odd sourcebook. One that, despite introducing some pretty solid or interesting concepts, took them way too far. I mean, seriously, the idea of historical records being lost is cool, but the rate in which people start believing massive conspiracies as fact only a decade following the data crash seriously haunts the believability in a setting otherwise known for its gritty realism. Not just this, but the focus on memes is just a little off-putting. Let me just put something up on screen for you. You're probably wondering, why am I showing you an action figure? Is it some sort of merchandise R. Talzorian used to sell? Or do I just have a cool little collection that I can't show anywhere else? Well, no to both of these. These photos or customized action figures are the backbone of V3's artwork. definitely not the image you had in mind of this book while I was discussing its setting, I'm sure. To unfortunately drag it even further, the color scheme and aesthetic, it should have been caught and overhauled long before publishing. I actually think a primary factor in the death of this book was the aesthetic. It was an insane shift from previous editions, while the majority of images also failed to match the implied atmosphere in the text. There's just not much room to start painting an accurate mental setting if you have these pages staring back at you. I don't really wish to beat a dead horse. I genuinely enjoy the work of Mike and Arthouse Orion, and the mistakes made in V3 only helped to build an enjoyable experience with Cyberpunk Red, one of those many changes being the promotion of artists to visualize the world for us fans. Seriously, it's been decades, and I'm certainly not the first to cover the negatives. So with a general understanding of its setting and aesthetic, just what was the reception on release? Probably what you would expect. It was met with a wave of fans expressing their disappointment. The obvious complaints cite the dramatic change in setting and style, as well as the use of action figures instead of more traditional works of art. Then to further confuse players, despite acting as a follow-up to the Firestorm series, it failed to do the job Aftershock was meant for. It really did seem that this edition was rushed out unnecessarily rather than being postponed in favor of neatly wrapping up the Firestorm series. Mike Pondsmith would even go on to say that V3 had been removed from the canon and that many elements were reworked into Cyberpunk Red. Though in complete honesty, I fail to see many of its story or aesthetic shining through in Red. I actually seem to see CyberGeneration, as previously stated, more than anything. There just wasn't much that could be recycled in a fitting way from V3. Even 5 years after its release, I found a pretty lengthy review on RPG.net, which ultimately rated it a 2 in style and a 3 in substance, with the review summarizing to this: I don't want to hate this game, but I'm struggling for nice things to say about it. It's not awful, provided you squint a lot and ignore the setting. Looking through the comments on this post provides a much more telling perspective of community opinion. You are correct, it is a piece of shit. I am so glad I got the PDF cheap because I would have ripped my eyeballs out if I had paid for that thing full price in print. Thanks for confirming that I have the last good version of Cyberpunk. In some ways, it's nice if a new version sucks so bad that you won't have anyone arguing with you about sticking with an older version. Even hopping over to more recent Reddit threads, you find the same stigma. It committed the cardinal sin of all media. It wasn't just garbage. People love to talk about garbage. They'll hate on garbage all day long, with some people qualifying as Olympic grade fetchers. No, 3.0 isn't just garbage, it's forgettable garbage. When it came out, the community as a whole just went, well, this sucks, and promptly ignored it. And since it was a niche market to begin with, there wasn't the massive wave of contention that a bad D&D edition might bring. We just kept using our 2020 stuff and let 3.0 die, and without a major corporation backing it, die it did. Got a whole 2 source books before it got buried. Even after reading these, the best thing about this community was that it didn't experience the same community hatred some series might. I was genuinely afraid Cyberpunk/Arthouse Orion was going to perish after Cyberpunk V3. I was so incredibly stoked when 2077 was announced because I knew it would reinvigorate interest in my favorite TTRPG/setting, end quote. And reinvigorate it did, Choom. There are more fans than ever, and despite 2077's broken release or quote-unquote flaws, it remains the best in the genre to many of us. Even as a fan of the Deus Ex series, it just can't come close to the awe I experience exploring Night City and the legends within. Even after this entire video, I would still encourage you to pick up the source books and experience it all for yourself. Though V3 is a tad bit difficult to find physically and can be a strain on the eyes, it's educational. But me taking this exploration wouldn't have been possible without you all. That's why, in the word of God, as Pondsmith likes to quote his statements, you're a legend. In fact, you're all legends. And that, Chooms, is everything I have to share about the retcon timelines of Mike Pondsmith's Cyberpunk. I originally meant to include a section about the hardwired sourcebook, but chose not to. As far as I can tell, it is quite literally not connected in any way to the main timeline, or even Cyberpunk itself. It was just a way to play in the universe of the novel Hardwired by Walter John Williams, through the use of Cyberpunk 2013's rulebook. So for that obscure connection, that really isn't a connection, it wasn't included, which I'm sure you all can understand, I think. To preface everything that comes after, I should probably define, at least what I can gather, what a mech is. Typically, the term is used to describe giant humanoid walking vehicles that are piloted, though these mechs vastly vary in size, shape, and appearance, making it difficult to discern a one definition fits all. Especially since ignoring science fiction, mecha really is just an abbreviation for mechanical, which encompasses all mechanical objects, including cars, guns, computers, etc. What makes it all the more confusing is its close relative, power armor. The distinction between the two can become hazy at best, usually dumbing power armor down to being form-fitting, while mechs are much larger than the pilot. Though between the two obvious distinctions of power armor, like Iron Man or Gundam mechas, there's a size range that stops being that of form-fitting, but not quite to the point of having a fully sized cockpit surrounding the user. It's this range that things like Iron Man's Hulkbuster and many of Cyberpunk's canon material falls into. Some will be more apparently power armor that fits over and follows the wearer's movement, while some may have a small form cockpit or some other way to mimic the wearer's movements. Like many series in the cyberpunk genre, there's generally more to do with power armor and augmentation, but the tech is still there. So ample warning that this first section of the video will be covering primarily power armor and the lore behind them in canon. If you would prefer to only dive into the possible alternative future of 2077 known as Mekton, then feel free to use the labeled timestamps. The origins of this weaponry date back to the 2010s with the creation of the Jacksuit by Metacorp, a nomad nation founded as a security and maritime construction firm. The Jacksuit was the world's first assisted combat personnel armor, abbreviated as ACPA. One of the top-rated solos of the time, Racer Chiba, was of the first to pilot the prototype. Not long after, the patents were sold to Militech in 2017, allowing Chiba to go freelance as a top mercenary with his knowledge around the armor, albeit still in large thanks to the skills he picked up as a second Central American war vet. Thanks to his appearance on the scene, a lot of the stigma around power armor was relieved in the solo career, opening the door for many. As time went on, progressions were naturally made. ACPAs increased in size, some had standalone weapons, some mounted, and some both. More common suits like the Arasaka Standard B and Zetatech Grasshopper were modest and fit like a glove, while others such as the Militech Commando or Russian Arms Bombardier were much bulkier and didn't fit to normal human proportions. During the Fourth Corporate War, the Firestorm, Stormfront, and Shockwave books gave us further look into alternative ACPAs. Pooled assets between Militech and IEC created the EVPA project, extravehicular powered armor, meant to operate at deep ocean levels and hostile environments, in order to provide additional advantages during the Shadow War. Though once the war went hot, it can be argued Arasaka had a much more terrifying development, the Dai Oni, the first interlocked cyborg body and ACPA, a 3.4 meter, 1.12 ton monster, though it wasn't necessarily its sizing that put it above the rest, as many shared similar specs. It was a fact that the user would be an alpha-class cyborg, modified for incredibly inhuman reflexes and speed, specialized to run that suit specifically, meaning that a biopod was running the entire operation. This to me somewhat calls into question its validity as a power armor though, seeing as it's essentially an extension of a full body conversion less than actually just being worn, hence the interlocking. Though there's only a handful of these ever made, and it was famously donned by Adam Smasher during his duel with Morgan Blackhand atop the Arasaka Towers. If Arasaka had managed to make an army of these ahead of the raid, the outcome of the war may have been very different. Following the war, because of shortages and how the time of Red functioned as an era, advancements weren't really made at the same rate until the Edgerunner era, a time period that just generally introduces us to a lot more exoskeletons and frames than anything else. First being the experimental exoskeleton David dons against Militech, and then Adam Smasher. Then of course the Militech Centaur used by Maelstrom's Royce, the NCPD, and several cyberpsychos. a Militech-grade exoskeleton designed to provide its pilot with increased defenses while also granting powerful offense. Following that, there's lastly the Militech Minotaur, that actually gets defined as a Militech manufactured mech, though it must be in the more traditional definition, seeing as it's remote controlled. Personally, haven't busted it open, so there just might be a cockpit. Someone might have to check that one out for me. And that really would be all I have to say for anything close to mechs in canon, if it weren't for the existence of concept art, which isn't confirmed canon but at least provides a glimpse into the development process and what was initially considered. Again though, it's concept art. Not much to dig into besides showing you all the images. Yes, most of these are exosuits and power armor again, but in varying styles and fashion. But it's these images by James Dolly that showcase an alternative model of the Militech Minotaur, a version that, while appearing with a similar graffiti and NCPD logo, now has a cockpit. These enemies certainly would have been formidable and a welcome addition of a remote-controlled counterparts, which in my opinion, were heavily underutilized in 2077. So that's all I have to say and show in relation to ACPA's 2077 and canon. Again though, if this interested you, be on the lookout for a full-fledged War in the World of Cyberpunk video that will be covering everything you need to know about corporate war weaponry and technology. Now, we can get to the more absurd version of Cyberpunk 2020's future. Mekton is a game series self-published by Mike Pondsmith that begun in 1984 thanks to an interest in the Mobile Suit Gundam manga. While the first edition was created as a box tactical wargame, the following would implement role-playing mechanics in the interlock system later used in Cyberpunk 2020, which of course also makes it possible to use Mekton's system as a basis for Cyberpunk mech implementation. While Mekton tends to take place in its own fictional setting, separate from any of Mike Pondsmith's other works, its sequel Mekton Zeta has a supplement campaign titled Starblade Battalion, specifically set in the future of Cyberpunk 2020. To quote Artalzorian itself, "From the ashes of the cyberpunk age, through ecological holocaust and the specter of extinction, humanity has finally risen, like a phoenix, to conquer the stars. An entire future history, which is one possible extrapolation of the Cyberpunk 2020 future. So, much like the 2020 supplement Deep Space that has some retcon 2030s lore, Starblade Battalion is also an alternative future of the 2020s. Much like many other source books, like V3 and CyberGeneration, both of which I covered in a previous video, that this should have been included in, but I'm an expert idiot, so my bad. So none of this is confirmed canon, but is set far enough out from 2020 to not really matter anyway. So when does it specifically take place? Well, in the year of 2180 of course. So even with the time skip to 2077, it's still another 103 years out. But I guess when you have characters like Sabro, who is 158 years old, it's not that long of a gap. So why does this book have a shared universe with Cyberpunk 2020? Well, we can thank the designers for explaining why in the first couple pages. It ultimately comes down to one point. The world they had designed seemed to be a very logical extension of Cyberpunk 2020, so it seemed natural to use the depth of background and history at their fingertips to flesh out the early history and sociological underpinnings of the Starblade saga. For example, nanotech-based BioWare became highly advanced descendants of traditional cyberware. The data web, a highly sophisticated info-sharing network derived from, of course, the net. And every person implants a data link by the age of 17 to access said net. And the mechs themselves, a simple extension of the ACPA, that are standard mil-spec hardware in 2020. The large-scale Myomers proved even more efficient on larger exoskeletons, so while this new world is very different, its roots can be traced back to the cyberpunk age. The period from the turn of the century until the early 2040s is often called the Cyberpunk Age, for its violence, rampant technological and sociological experimentation, and general lack of stability. By the end of said era, megacorps such as Militech, Petrochem, and International Electric stood alone as the only ones capable of large-scale organization and activity, managing to consolidate their power and beginning an unavoidable campaign of development to every corner of the globe. Their greed was insatiable. Having complete control of raw resources and markets of Earth wasn't even enough. and so they aimed higher, reaching out to the early orbital habitats and beyond to the asteroid belt. And with their cities, even the net spread as far as Mars. By 2070, the Earth faced complete ecological disaster and had even been sterilized by pollution and waste. In face of countless deaths at the hands of destructive new weather, plagues, and more, the ecological emergency government rose to challenge the corpse. An alliance of the few remaining national governments joined together to try to stem the tide of eco-collapse. Naturally, the megacorps forcibly resisted their military forces, as the lion's share of proposed measures would severely hurt their bottom line. There's no room for negotiation, so the EEG activated its remaining national armies and launched the Unification Wars, which of course deserves a sidebar. While different from the canon unification wars between the NUSA and Free States, there's many examples such as this from varying alternate timelines and retcon material that later gets reintroduced in canon. Despite the fact unification wars aren't unique to the cyberpunk universe, they appear in all sorts of sci-fi such as Warhammer. It just shows Pondsmith was interested in doing this sort of thing at some point, especially since this is an extension of the 2020s, and even falls along a similar timeline, though it lasted much longer in Mekton. Ultimately, the corporations were forced to withdraw to their orbital colony strongholds and pursue peace. By 2090, the wars had all but ended, and the individual governments of Earth dissolved as the EEG was declared the unified authority overseeing the long and difficult road back from self-destruction. The corporations which had sided with the EEG early on were given preferential placement in the newly formed Economic Council, and all corporations were forever banned from having armed security forces of any kind, a decision that the canon timeline severely needs. From that point on, there's a massive shift away from what we would know as the cyberpunk genre. There's a lot more to the story if it wasn't already obvious, as that was all precursor for the transition from the cyberpunk era to a mecha setting. But this video isn't really meant to be a Mekton deep dive, so I'm going to be selective and aim towards cyberpunk-oriented information. One key player from Cyberpunk isn't so surprisingly still around after the Unification Wars, which honestly, I bet you could guess. That's right, the Biotechnica Corporation. Or maybe you weren't right, I don't really know. I can't hear you. They might fiddle around with unethical practices, but they do like saving the Earth. What ultimately endeared them to the USSA Economic Council was that they had managed to store huge gene banks of plants and animals long thought extinct. These genetic archives possibly contained as many as 75% of Earth's species cryogenically preserved until a reconstruction program could be put into place. And now with government funding, Biotechnica is reinstalling these animals into the biosphere as it heals. Biotechnica has spent enormous resources and time to make itself invaluable in just about every environmental rehabilitation project conducted in the system, as well as a few in the colonies. So while Biotechnica is thriving, not so much could be said for other corporations that dug themselves a little bit too deep into warfare. Keep in mind that Biotechnica is legitimately one of the nicer, more helpful corporations even in 2077. They're not perfect by any means, as they are still a megacorp, but they do have a much healthier impact on the general environment. So it's nice to see they have good branches no matter the timeline. So, being a mecha and all, there's a lot to say about the Mektons and their combat system. But unless you're planning on running a campaign or a combat scenario, there's not much reason to dive into it. Besides being badass as usual and previously stated the natural progression of ACPAs, there's not much else beyond what you might learn in any other mech-oriented series like Gundam. Though if there's enough interest from you guys on Mekton itself, rather than just its cyberpunk-based supplement, I wouldn't mind making a video diving into all those specifics. The big question to end it all. A theory of somewhat like my typical videos contain. Will anything like mechs appear in Cyberpunk Orion or other 2077 media? Well, no one knows the answer for sure. They can certainly continue on their way with ACPAs, but it's also certainly possible that inspiration from series like Titanfall, Mekton, or even 2077's own concept art is used. In the upcoming dark future, a fifth corporate war and rogue AI invasion seems inevitable. With technology the way it is, nearly everything being able to be quick hacked by a talented netrunner, net-connected gear seems a lot less desirable. Now you can make an argument for a self-dependent power suit being the next step, but keep in mind that if for any reason this gear seizes up, the user is entirely stuck inside. There aren't much mechanism you can put in a skin-tight suit for a user to get out without any power. What I propose is it's much more reasonable to be in a cockpit, even if it's small, allowing for the capability to pop a hatch and hop out in the case of total failure. After all, it's been 50 years since the first ACPA prototype, and despite the time of Red being a bit of a dead zone in relation to advancement, science picked up vastly in the new Edgerunner era, allowing us to see all the new technology contrasted in 2077. So to say there's capability to make these mechs a reality is likely an understatement. It's really more of a question on if such designs would be reasonable to produce in universe, and what Pondsmith would like to include in his own series. If I were to place eddies on it, I'd say it's likely we see large rogue AI piloted robots, kind of like in Phantom Liberty. But the likelihood of seeing a piloted mech remains slim outside of what we've seen in concept art. Now that fits the setting much better. If you managed to make it this far into the video, I just wanted to give a huge thanks for the support. I appreciate you taking time out of your busy days to give me a listen, more so than I could ever put into words. I truly hope this video helped you out. This of course includes my channel members who continue to support me even during times in which I can't really upload as much as I'd like. Expect to be seeing a lot more content in the near future, including the vile characters of Cyberpunk 2077 lore, the Cyberpunk 2077 theory iceberg, the heist was a setup, and many more. As always, make sure to have a great week, chooms, and I will see you in the next one.